The story of Jaehaerys II is one of unfulfilled expectations. He was named for the king with the longest rule in the history of the Targaryen dynasty, yet he would have one of the shortest reigns of any Targaryen king. His father and grandfather led armies against subsequent Blackfyre pretenders, but while he did not lack for courage, he did lack for health, and thus had to rely on his vassals and their forces to face the Blackfyre threat. Jaehaerys II insisted his son and daughter marry so that the prince that was promised could be born, but didn't live to see whether one of his descendants could actually fit the prophecy. With such a short reign, was Jaehaerys II only a stopgap between the reforms of Egg and the tyranny of the Mad King? Or is there more with this penultimate Targaryen on the Iron Throne? Did he have his own prophetic dreams or destiny? What did he think about Summerhall or the end of the Blackfyres? And if the prince that was promised is his descendant and saves the world, how much, if at all, do we have Jaehaerys II to thank for that? Today we shall speak to the life and times of Jaehaerys II, the Red Comet of Targaryen kings, burning brightly but briefly, bringing both beginnings and endings, for better or worse. Nina Krusling, our favorite guest, and I will break down all that and more on this episode of History of Westeros podcast. Hello and welcome, everybody. It's a pre-recorded episode of History of Westeros podcast. We did this one in the studio with no live viewers. That's fun. We do that every once in a while. This is a nice lengthy episode about a Targaryen king who doesn't get a lot of press, but has a lot to be said about. We do every episode on Spotify as a video and on YouTube. They are available everywhere. You can find podcasts on every platform. And if you listen on Patreon, they are ad-free. Hey, Nina, how's it going? You were the main writer for this episode, so it's good to see you back again. And of course, we want to plug your goodqueenally.tumblr.com home base there.
Thank you. I am glad to be back. Life is good. Life is very, very good. I wish I had more time to write, but that's the chronic story of everyone. But yeah, I absolutely love, whenever I have a spare moment, love writing on the Tumblr.
Awesome. So folks, if you have questions about this episode, email them to westeroshistory@gmail.com or hit us on any of our socials. We're pretty much on every platform. At the end of this episode, I will mention some that have overlapping topics, ones that relate to this one, so you can continue to be immersed. Here are the section headers that we'll give you for this episode. We have our setup that includes the first description and the first mention, his early life, then the main course here, the marriage, prophecy, and Summerhall section, and then his reign. Then we have his death and his legacy, which are pretty substantial as well. You might be surprised at what he's had an influence on and who. So we'll get to all of that as throughout the course of this episode. Let's get to it with the first description. A nice resource we have is George's descriptions for the Targaryen kings. And I mean, they were written as instructions to the artist Amok. And this is what we have for Jaehaerys II per the So Spake Martin. Quote,
amiable, clever, sickly, he died young, pale and frail with very large purple eyes, shoulder-length hair, a silky beard, a tired smile. One arm concealed by the drape of his cape. Wears Maekar's crown.
The arm bit is interesting. The implications being that something's wrong. Maybe he's hiding it from view. I've seen a few other artists run with this and include it visibly in pieces where it's not hidden. So they have to kind of run with whether it's withered or missing some fingers or something like that. It's unclear, but hiding it definitely is suggestive.
It makes me think of Wilhelm II, who's the last German emperor. He had a disability from birth. His left arm was about 6 inches shorter than his right arm, that very physically weak on it. My non-professional medical understanding is that it was basically ripped out of its socket at birth. And so when you look at images and photographs of the time of Wilhelm, almost always his arm is behind his back, or it's resting on a sword, or it's within his other hand, or he's holding gloves. And it's always to sort of hide this fact or disguise this fact that he's got this disabled left arm. And so I don't know if maybe that's what George is going for. I also kind of see it as sort of sartorial representation of Jaehaerys being not quite ready or prepared for this role. Like, the clothes are literally too big for him because politically and dynastically, this is not his role. These are literally not his clothes. So I think it's maybe a little column A, little column B too.
I like that. Yeah, I like the idea of interpreting what George is going for by just how he dresses him. Here's the first mention of Jaehaerys II. It comes in Eddard V, A Game of Thrones. Quote, "This illness that took him,"
said Ned.
"had you ever seen its like before in other men?"
"Near 40 years I have been Grand Maester of the Seven Kingdoms," Pycelle replied. "Under our good King Robert, and Aerys Targaryen before him, and his father, Jaehaerys II, before him, and even for a few short months under Jaehaerys' father, Aegon the Fortunate, the fifth of his name. I have seen more of illness than I care to remember, my lord. I will tell you this, every case is different, and every case is alike. Lord Jon's death was no stranger than any other."
That's right. He's the grandfather of Dany, Viserys, and Rhaegar. This is also a good reminder that while we call him Aegon the Unlikely, and a lot of the common folk did, many others called him Aegon the Fortunate. It's a bit more noble sounding, a bit more proper, you know. We would guess that Jaehaerys and his siblings preferred that epithet too, as it, reflected on them. Though, honestly, while the realm benefited, it's a philosophical question whether you're actually fortunate to become king. I don't know. I mean, that's not a question for today, but it's not always a fortunate thing.
No, and again, that's beyond the scope of today. But I think, to me, it's sort of representative of, and again, I'm going to go back to Tudor history because that's where I live, is, the difference between what Tudors would have generally referred to as happy versus merry. When they talk about happy, it's really not happy in the way that we would say, joyful or having fun. That's really their word, merry. When they say happy, it's really more something along the lines of fortunate. You have a good fortune. Something good has happened to you. Sort of the opposite of the word hapless. And so with Aegon the Fortunate, I kind of think of it as he might not be personally fortunate in the fact that he's enjoying kingship, but he is fortunate in the sense that a crown has been bestowed on him who was born the fourth son of a fourth son.
Yeah, that's for sure. That is very fortunate in that sense, no doubt. Early life. He was born in 225 AC, the second son and second child of Prince Aegon and Lady Betha Blackwood. Of course, this is Egg from the Tales of Dunk and Egg. Grown up, but not yet king. He'll be Aegon V, of course. Egg had married Betha Blackwood in 220, a year after the Third Blackfyre Rebellion, when he was 20 and Betha was 19. Now, Jaehaerys had an older brother, Duncan, who would be later known as Duncan the Small and the Prince of Dragonflies. We don't exactly know when he was born, but it was between 220 and 224, so he was up to 4 years older than Jaehaerys, but as little as 1 year older. Jaehaerys would also have 3 younger siblings as well. There'd be Daeron, born in 228, because of course there's a Daeron, right? There has to be a Daeron. And 2 sisters, Shara, born in 226, and Rael. We don't know exactly, a range of 229 to 234. So not very clear on that one, but it's not super important at this point. It's very likely that Jaehaerys was named after King Jaehaerys, the most successful, perhaps you could say, most beloved, certainly longest reign, as we said in the intro. And they may have been hoping for some kind of, giving him that kind of wisdom. I think there had been a few other Jaehaeryses that were named in the cradle that didn't make it, right? But this is the only other one, obviously, who... There wasn't one that wasn't a prince that didn't become king.
I was going to say, Aegon II's son was Jaehaerys, but I'm not... I'm trying to think if there was any other Jaehaeryses before. Obviously, Aerys II, who's this Jaehaerys' son, will go on to have his own son, Jaehaerys, but obviously that's in the future. But no, I think you're right. I think that he is likely named after Jaehaerys I. And I think, look, my feelings on Jaehaerys as a character aside, I have many of them and very few of them are kind. I think it's fair to say that in the world of Westeros, the popular concept of Jaehaerys I is this king who was the best of the Targaryen monarchs, who looked out for his people, who brought peace and justice and stability and prosperity to Westeros. And even though I don't think anyone assumes at this time that Egg will automatically become king when his father dies, it doesn't mean that Egg isn't thinking about what sort of models do I want for my sons? What sort of models do I want for the next generation of princes? And I think Egg is looking to someone like a Jaehaerys and saying, this is a good king. This is a king who looks out for his people. This is a king who we hear Egg himself cite the example of Jaehaerys and Alysanne to Dunk in the Sworn Sword of abolishing the right to the first night. Egg is aware of this legacy of Jaehaerys, and I think that's something he wants to bring into his own sons and the next generation of House Targaryen.
Yeah, Jaehaerys wasn't just born as a prince of the royal family, which of course he was, but it wasn't a standard marriage that he was born from. Almost all of the marriages in any noble family, but especially the royal family, are dynastic. Either they're the standard Targaryen incest pairing or they're made for some alliance reason. This is not the case. He was born of a marriage made for love. Of course, they were given some leeway in part because no one ever expected him to inherit in the first place. They figured, no problem, go ahead, it doesn't matter. But that it turned out to matter quite a bit. So that's quite an unusual start to life as compared to other Targaryens, isn't it?
It is. And I think that that's going to be, I mean, look, not to give away the plot here, but the marriage is made for love and marriage is made for dynastic or supernatural prophetic reasons are going to be a major factor in the story of Jaehaerys II. So the fact that he is born of this love match, of a marriage that was not intended, that may have even broken up a betrothal that Egg could have had before. There's certainly at least the barest suggestion of that from young Egg in The Tales of Dunk and Egg. The fact that Jaehaerys is born of this union, no, it's not completely unknown, but it's rare. It's unusual. It's something that's commented on in his own time. And I think Jaehaerys would have had that example in front of him of parents who are together primarily because they loved each other and really not for any other reason.
The baby, Jaehaerys, was born during the reign of his paternal grandfather, King Maekar. So Jaehaerys' own father would, become to be known as Aegon the Unlikely after he became king, the fourth son of a fourth son, him being that first fourth son, King Maekar. So you argue maybe that he should be called Maekar the Unlikely too? I agree with that point.
he's Maekar the possibly slightly less unlikely. I'm not sure the level, but really, I mean, when Maekar is born and growing up, I don't think anyone would have assumed that Maekar would eventually become king. He's not just a fourth son, which is already farther down the line of succession, but he's a fourth son where two of his older brothers have a son or multiple sons of their own. So no one looking at the Targaryen dynasty as those other princes are growing up is going to think, oh, of course, Maekar will become king eventually. That would have seemed pretty unusual, if not totally out of the realm of possibility. And yet, here we are when baby Jaehaerys is born, and Maekar has been king for the better part of 5 years.
Yeah, I think if Egg hadn't become king, the unlikelihood of his reign or rule would have been noted a lot more. It's just something way more unlikely happened. He's always getting overshadowed, Maekar is, right? That's just the story of his life, and apparently his death, So, yeah, there's a lot of family traditions here, things that were kind of regular for the Targaryens in this era, and some things that were changing. So that we'll go over some of those during the episode. And one of those that's perhaps the most famous is the Blackfyres. They had just not really stopped. They kept coming. And that was true in this era too, isn't it?
It is. I mean, again, Jaehaerys is born in 226. We're 30 years out from the first Blackfyre rebellion, which in Westerosi terms is not that far along. When you're talking about families that have existed for the better part of 8,000 years, 30 years is the blink of an eye. And in this era, the Blackfyres are still very much an active threat across the Narrow Sea. Again, we talk about Maekar being king at this time. Maekar was one of the great victors of the Red Grass Field, and he didn't just stop then. Maekar also went to war against the Blackfyres again in the Third Blackfyre Rebellion. Egg fought in the Third Blackfyre Rebellion. So did Aerion, unfortunately. But, and again, not to give the game away, but there's going to be a Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion, and Jaehaerys is going to be present for that. So this is not a case where the Blackfyres are sort of this theoretical possibility that, oh, maybe someday there might be a claim by one of them. No, this is a branch of the family that is very much extant. It is out there. It wants the Iron Throne, and it's going to try to take the Iron Throne.
Yeah, they weren't shy about it. They pretty much made it known they wanted it and would say so often and loudly. And yeah, it wasn't a underhanded attempt. It was a overt attempt. They wanted everyone to know it. But in a way, things were a little more tenuous for House Targaryen, even though none of the Blackfyres after Daemon were nearly as formidable. So that, in that sense, it was a little less of a threat. But in another sense, they had more of an internal threat because their own problems were happening, huh?
That's absolutely true. And, the two are sort of intertwined as well. I mean, when the fortunes of one are declining, the fortunes of the other are going to seem perhaps potentially on the rise. But, I think when Jaehaerys is born, it's this period of, I'm not going to call it crisis for House Targaryen, but uncertainty, dynastic uncertainty, maybe a better word here. I mentioned before, when we're, as readers, looking at House Targaryen during, let's say, the tourney of Ashford at the start of that, it looks like a very strong and stable and secure dynasty. You've got the 4 sons of the ruling king. Baelor's got 2 sons of his own. Rhaegal, I don't know if Aelor was born at that point, but he certainly would go on to have Aelor. Maekar, of course, has his 4 sons. There are so many Targaryens that Aemon actually has to be sent to the Citadel because Daeron is so worried about having too many Targaryen princes around. Too many dragons is as dangerous as too few. So it goes from this surplus of Targaryen princes, nothing could possibly touch the stability of House Targaryen, and then you get to barely 15 years later, and all of a sudden, Baelor is dead. His sons are dead. Aerys is dead. Rhaegal is dead. Aelor is dead. Aelor's sister Aelura is dead. Yes, Daenora is still alive, but the only male line branch of House Targaryen left is Maekar and his sons. And we don't even know if Daeron was still alive at this point, Daeron the Drunken. He could have already died by 226 AC. It's unclear. But at most, it's Maekar, it's Daeron who has no sons of his own. It's Aerion who as yet has no sons of his own. It's Aemon who's at the Citadel and obviously will not have any sons of his own. And then it's Egg. So once again, House Targaryen is sort of dynastically collapsing in on itself.
Yeah, even the candidates that were there, and they were a shrinking pool of candidates, weren't good candidates. So only maybe 1 or 2 of them were good candidates, and that's not great. That doesn't give a lot of people the warm and fuzzies. It's interesting to consider some of these relationships that are hidden, right? Jaehaerys, Aerion and him existed at the same time. Was he picking on him like he picked on Egg, or is that a little too far apart, or is he a little bit more mature by then? Was he worse, I don't know.
For Jaehaerys' sake, I hope their interactions were few, if ever.
Yeah, right. Yeah, that's not an influence you want. I imagine his parents keeping it. Don't talk to Uncle Aerion. Yeah, just stay away from him. So, what would the general reaction of the family have been to Jaehaerys' birth? Would it be more positive because hey, this is just a regular Targaryen, maybe not madness or anything like that.
Well, I mean, I think that, obviously we're getting a new male of House Targaryen, and that's almost always a cause for celebration in any hereditary aristocratic dynasty. Targaryens are no exception. But I think even though no one is looking at baby Jaehaerys when he's born and saying, oh, he's obviously going to be king someday, I think absolutely no one would have been saying that. I don't think it would have escaped notice of at least some of the people becoming aware of his birth or witnessing this birth to see the branch that is populating House Targaryen, for lack of a better term. This is Egg's branch. We've got, again, Daeron may already have been dead. He certainly only had the one child. It's a girl, and she's supposedly simple-minded. We've got Aerion. He is not married. Everyone is aware of Aerion's cruelty and violence. No one, I think, wants Aerion's child to succeed to the extent he even will have one, which no one knows at this point. Aemon is a maester. He's sort of out of the running at this point. The only branch that is continuing here is Egg's. And now, with Jaehaerys' birth, Egg's got his heir and his spare. So I think it would have been at least intriguing for people to look at Jaehaerys' birth and think, what's going to happen when Maekar dies? Are we going to potentially look to Egg? Yeah, he's, quote unquote, half a peasant, but he's also married to an aristocrat, and he's got these 2 boys. He's got the heir and the spare. That's dynastic stability right there, and that may be worth overcoming that, again, quote unquote, half a peasant attitude toward him. So I think it would have been interesting to think about Jaehaerys less about himself and more about what he meant for his own branch within House Targaryen. And of course, we're not entirely sure what Egg's other children looked like physically. There's a drawing of his sons in the World of Ice and Fire, but how canonical that is, I'm not really certain at this point. But we definitely know, from George's own words, that Jaehaerys is very Targaryen looking. He's got the silver gold hair, he's got the purple eyes. So even if Prince Duncan looked more like the Blackwood side of the family, now it's no question that the Targaryen look is populating in the next generation. We've got this baby prince who is showing he is a Targaryen if you're judging by looks alone.
So what else was going on around the realm when he was growing up? Things that he maybe would have remembered from his early childhood, or things that would have been impactful, things along that line?
A lot. You know, it's unfortunate that the World of Ice and Fire doesn't devote a lot to Maekar's reign from Maekar's perspective. I'm hoping we certainly get a lot more of that in future tales. But there's a lot that's going on around the realm that doesn't necessarily have to do with the royal court. So we know that roughly around the time of Jaehaerys' birth, there's an outbreak of Grey Plague in Old Town. And it's apparently really devastating. It wipes out half of the city. And considering Old Town is the largest city in Westeros, that's kind of a problem. That's a major, major, we all lived through a pandemic. We can understand just how devastating something like that would have been. Jaehaerys is also born at the beginning of a 7-year summer, a summer that goes on so long that there are even people at the Citadel who think that this is the great summer, that, oh, we've done it. This is the summer that's never going to end. We're all good now. Obviously, that's not true. Autumn is going to come and then there's going to be a particularly bad winter. But in that way, we can think of Jaehaerys as almost a Bran-like figure. Bran is born during a long summer. He never knows winter until, the story starts. He's a summer child. And I don't mean that in a, pejorative way. I mean that is quite literally. He is a child of summer. And that's the same for Jaehaerys. He only knows the sort of peace and plenty that come with a Westerosi summer. We don't know if Dagon Greyjoy was still active. I tend to think Maekar had already sort of taken care of the Dagon problem by 226. But it's very possible that either Dagon himself or people who are following in Dagon's name among the Ironborn are still reading at this point, that there are still sort of active problems among the Ironborn. And we know that there's problems also in the north, because when Jaehaerys is 2 years old, Willem Stark dies turning back Raymond Rightbeard at Long Lake. It's a major incursion into the north that is only stopped by the combined efforts of the Starks and Umbers on one side and the Night's Watch on the other. And then in the west, we've got Gerald Lannister and Rohan Weber. We meet Rohan in the Sworn Sword. She's going to, spoiler alert, go on to marry Gerald Lannister. Their grandson is going to be Tywin. They're ruling at Casterly Rock. So these are figures that Jaehaerys' father certainly would have known. But Rohan's going to disappear by the end of the decade, which is a mystery that is as yet still unanswered. Hopefully we get a whole tale about that. But there's a lot going on. This is a very active decade, despite the fact that we don't get a lot about it in the description of Maekar's reign itself.
Yeah, it's like he maybe saved it, like you said, for Duncan Egg, just like he's not given us much detail in the third Blackfyre Rebellion, but on either side of it, we get quite a bit. Definitely very interesting times, I agree. There's a lot more detail in this era than, say, the 50 years before that. But the Blackfyre Rebellions, as we will come back to several times in this episode, because they are such a constant, ubiquitous threat. They're out there, they probably lived in not fear of them, but in constant awareness that there was somebody out there that was powerful and tenacious that was trying to oust them and probably kill them. That's an interesting thing to have hanging over you when you're a young man.
Absolutely. And again, we talked a little bit before about Maekar as this figure that really, I think, represents the fight against the Blackfyres. Maekar is there for the first and the third Blackfyre rebellions. And it's entirely possible that Maekar's death is also connected to the Blackfyres. He dies in the Peak Uprising. The Peaks are major supporters of the Blackfyres. So I have a feeling that was, if not a formal Blackfyre rebellion, some sort of proto-Blackfyre rebellion. But they are very much an active threat. And so Jaehaerys is growing up with this idea of, to be a Targaryen in this era is to fight the Blackfyres. That is something that goes hand in hand with being part of this dynasty. His grandfather did it. His father did it. And someday, again, spoiler alert, it's going to be his job as well to do it.
We have things like Hagon being defeated and killed while his son is still alive, and they just immediately, after his escape, Bittersteel crowns him just openly. Like they hadn't regained their strength, they hadn't reestablished themselves, but they're like throwing that hand in the air immediately. We're not done here. There's some uncertainty here as well with the Blackfyre family too, right? Like we don't know who of them was still alive and how big that family was. It's potentially a reasonably big family, but it's also potentially as thin as the Targaryens became a little bit later.
Yeah, it is confusing because we get, there's the first two sons of Daemon. They obviously die on the Redgrass Field. There's Daemon the Younger. He's, arrested after the abortive second Blackfyre rebellion, and then we don't know what his ultimate fate is. There's Hagon, who dies during the third Blackfyre rebellion. There's Aenys, who we'll talk about in just a moment here. We don't get a sense of who the other two sons of Daemon were, and after that, the Blackfyre family tree gets real spotty in terms of where everyone falls. We know about Daemon III, who is Hagon's son, but who Hagon's wife is, whether or not any of the other sons had sons of their own, what branch Maelys is going to come from, how he's related to the Daemon, his cousin that he kills. These are all kind of open questions that I assume we will get in future Tales of Dunk and Egg or whatever the sequel will be to Fire and Blood, but at this point, it's kind of a big question mark.
It is, but what we can say about the time period, even without knowing nearly all we could know about the Blackfyres in this era, is Jaehaerys and the rest of his family would know all of that stuff. These are, again, things that wouldn't be hidden because the Blackfyres weren't being shy. They were very open about all this. They were trumpeting their intentions. So they wouldn't have hidden scions out there, I don't think, other than the ones that were just really, really far down the ladder in that sense. So he would know that he has these distant cousins and would have specific names and maybe even hear about some of their deeds. Like, eventually they would have heard about Maelys twisting his cousin's head off. And what was the reaction of the Targaryen court to something like that? They're like, whoa.
I mean, I tend to think, if they heard about that, maybe they're thinking, oh, well, these Blackfyres are more trouble themselves than they are to us. If they're fighting themselves, then who cares as long as they're not fighting us? If they're squabbling over who gets to lead their free company, great, fantastic, let them. As long as they stay off Westerosi shores, we don't really care.
Yeah, right? Yeah. But this is very interesting for Jaehaerys, though. He's aware of all this. He knows it's a responsibility of his family. And as he gets older, he's getting a little closer to a little higher in the line of succession, shall we say. But he also, as we mentioned at the beginning, he doesn't really have the physical capability to be a warrior himself. So how do those two things go together? How do they interact? A prince who wants to help his family with this problem that's been around for so long, yet he can't really do it with a sword, can he?
No, and it is an interesting question. I tend to think that he probably wasn't ever formally trained as a knight, or if he was, it was much less so than his brothers were. We know that Prince Duncan the Small is competing in tournaments. We know that Prince Daeron is going to be described as a splendid soldier who lives for battle and tournament. And maybe in that way, there's perhaps almost less pressure on Jaehaerys to perform in that way because he's got these two brothers on either side who can do that. So, and he's also not the oldest son. So there may also be a lesser way where it's, maybe not quite as expected that Jaehaerys is going to take up that mantle. Obviously, there's going to be some level of expectation. Westeros is a martial aristocracy, so you're going to expect that your leaders are A, male, and B, can lead in war. That's patriarchy's going to patriarchy. But I think that perhaps there's less pressure on Jaehaerys because he's not that eldest son. And on the flip side, he is consistently described as clever. And so I think maybe what Jaehaerys decided is, I can't be a warrior, but I can be a scholar. I can be someone who reads a lot. I can be someone who has an understanding of our world, of the history of our world, of the prophecies in our world, of the supernatural. And I can figure this out through text and literature, what my brothers can do on the battlefield.
Yeah, you're right about that. I don't think he would have too much pressure. He would want to participate in the battlefield because it's just not only a thing that his family would have sort of built into their ethos, but all of Westeros, young boys are supposed to learn to fight with their swords and all that. There's maybe a little bit of Bran here without the quite intense ability and powers here, but definitely a little shades of that for sure. We've also got some similarities to certain pair of Lannister twins, don't we?
Yeah, a little bit. We know that Jaehaerys is said to be close to his sister Shera, the one that he will end up marrying. And Yandel says that he loved his sister from a very early age. Now, we don't get a lot of detail as to what that meant. We know that Aegon and Betha had tried to separate them once it became obvious that they loved each other. But without being too crude about it, we don't get the same level of detail that we do about young Jaime and Cersei's interactions. And on a practical level, it's a lot, I should say this, it means a lot more on a physical and logistical level for Jaime and Cersei to be separated than it does for Jaehaerys and Shera. Jaehaerys and Shera can be housed at opposite ends of the Red Keep. When Jaime and Cersei are separated, they are living on what is the equivalent of opposite sides of San Francisco. Like that is the level that we're dealing with in terms of distance here. So I think without knowing what their interactions looked like or what Aegon and Betha were seeing, I think there's clearly this development of affection that will turn into love between these two siblings, but not necessarily something that anyone knows is going to be that in the future.
Right. It also isn't as unthinkable, for Targaryens to do this. It's people are a little more, I suppose, acclimated to this sort of behavior, even with the parents trying to separate them. And we should point out, it's not like this was the expectation even recently. Let's look back a few generations or look up the family tree. So we have their father and mother were not both Targaryen. That was a Targaryen and a Blackwood. Go back to Maekar. You have Maekar and Deanna Dane. Not a Targaryen pairing either. Go back again, and you have Daeron II, and you have Mariah Martell. So that's, again, not an incest pairing. You have to, then one more. You do have one, Aegon the Unworthy and Nerys. So, but that's a lot, right? So it wasn't the standard anymore, and it hadn't been for a while. But, some people are traditionalists, and obviously it's not just about that, is it? There's a lot of other reasons, I suppose it could be.
Well, and to be fair, I mean, Egg mentions to Dunk, oh, my sister put a love potion in my drink once so that I would marry her instead of my other sister. So I think, and Dunk comments that it sounds so bizarre to him, meaning Dunk, for Egg to talk so casually about this, but Dunk realizes Egg is a Targaryen, so this is natural to him. To talk about eventually going on to marry a sibling, for the Targaryens, yes, it had not been common in those prior immediate generations, but yes, this is something that was very common within the family on a grand scale. And again, I think there is a way where Egg's marriage to Betha may have been breaking off a marriage between Egg and one of his sisters.
Yeah, that's entirely possible. What about the rest of his family? There would have been the children of Egg's sisters and a few other, dangling branches that are not as well known. What do we have to say about that?
Well, so we know that Egg has these two sisters. Aemon says that they married and had children. So I think it is extremely likely, if not basically confirmed at this point, that one of them married into House Tarth. And so Jaehaerys would have presumably had some Tarth cousins that he could visit, know about, interact with. We don't know who Raelle would have married or who her children are. They're never mentioned, so to the extent that they're out there, or Ray, excuse me, I don't know where they would have gone, but it's very possible that Jaehaerys would have interacted with them as well. And then they obviously know their Uncle Aemon, because we know that Egg's daughter, Raelle, will call Aemon Uncle Maester. So there's clearly this friendly familial relationship with Aemon. For a time during Maekar's reign, Aemon is working as Maester for their brother Daeron. Again, I don't know if Daeron was alive by this point, but it's very possible that Aemon was a physically close, as well as a personally close figure that they were interacting with on a regular basis.
And that's part of how he was so knowledgeable about Daeron's dreams and how much they affected him. and which, of course, got him involved in that in its own way. And in 233, Jaehaerys' grandfather, Maekar, was killed in the aforementioned Peak Uprising, and that caused a problem. That gave us a great council, didn't it?
Well, it sure did. And that's because, again, even though the king had these 4 sons, by the time the king is dead, it is wildly unclear what the succession should look like. His oldest son is already dead, and he's left only a daughter who is simple-minded. His second son is dead, and he's left a newborn son, this infant baby. And then you've got the third son, Aemon. Again, he's been a maester for a number of years at this point. He's obviously unmarried and has no children.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's Aeg, who is the only son that is still living and dynastically available, and has married an aristocrat and has, older sons of his own. And yet at the same time, he's got this sort of quote unquote half a peasant attitude about him. So it's not automatic that he's going to get the throne, beside the fact that he's the youngest son. And so the result is that there's a calling of a great council, this gathering of as many lords and ladies of the realm as there possibly can be to acclaim a new king, to say who should be our new ruler. And because Jaehaerys is Aeg's son, because he's about 7 years old at this point, I think it's entirely possible, if not probable, that Jaehaerys and his brothers were there, that they would have been watching their father at this, that they would have been watching these proceedings, and it would have been smart for Aeg to bring them. I mean, this is part of his resume, so to speak. This is saying, look at me, I've got heirs of my own. I've got these princes that can succeed after me. And so I think for young Jaehaerys, again, put yourself in the mind of someone like Bran in a Game of Thrones. They're about the same age. They're seeing this all for the first time. And so Jaehaerys is seeing this assembly of the aristocracy of Westeros, this gathering of power and prestige at Harrenhal, and just this absolutely massive show of feudal power and feudal power politics. And so it's interesting to think about, what does this mean to him? What is he thinking as he's looking at this? Is he thinking, look at this, the crown's vassals, they've got power. They've got real power. They've got real retainers they're bringing with them. They have in this moment the choice to say who is going to be king. And those same vassals that have the say today could say very differently tomorrow. And it's a real show of, for certainly the first time in Jaehaerys' life, and for one of the first times in the history of House Targaryen, it's this real show of the Targaryens are not absolute. They can be replaced. This is something that theoretically could happen in the future.
But not if they had dragons, right? That's another seed we plant right here. But sticking with the Great Council, where there were no dragons to be found, other than the metaphorical ones. And also sticking with the example of Bran, who in his first chapter witnesses an execution. Now, we don't know that Jaehaerys witnessed this execution, but one of the contenders at the Great Council did meet that fate. And that would have been a lesson of sorts of a very similar type, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. So we know that Aenys Blackfyre, who's this 5th son of Daemon Blackfyre, comes over and says, I'm going to plead my case. And Bloodraven actually says, yeah, I'll give you safe passage. Absolutely. Come on over. You can make your case to the assembled lords and ladies of Westeros. And Aenys does. And immediately, Bloodraven has him assassinated. He literally has him killed once he lands in Westeros. And it's interesting to think, what is Jaehaerys' reaction? Again, to your point, I don't think Jaehaerys literally saw this happen, but he certainly would have heard about it. He certainly would have been aware that this happened. And is he thinking, well, my grandfather fought the Blackfyres. My father and my uncle fought the Blackfyres. And so now, if there's a Blackfyre, well, we can't let him have the throne. So is this okay? But at the same time, what does this mean? Are the Blackfyres so dangerous a threat that we can't even just defeat them on the battlefield? If they so much as step foot in Westeros, even with our say-so, we can kill them because they are that much of a threat. Or is he thinking, in the future, thinking back on this moment, that, well, Bloodraven had Aenys assassinated And it still didn't work. There's still more Blackfyres that came. That, again, spoiler alert, there's going to be a fourth Blackfyre rebellion pretty soon after this. So is Jaehaerys thinking back on this moment and thinking, well, what good did that really do us if we can kill one of the sons of Daemon and the Blackfyres are still pushing for this to happen, still pushing for their right to the throne? So it's interesting to think what would have been going through his mind then and then reflecting on it in the future.
Certainly it would, especially perhaps how it ended, which is that his father got chosen. And that's, for an 8-year-old, I don't know how he would take that, but I think he would be happy. I think he would be happy for his father and the way an 8-year-old could, and maybe very curious about what would come next, maybe a little anxious also in the way an 8-year-old could be anxious. So he goes from all that uncertainty, shall we say, to being second in the line of succession. And he has now gotten a demonstration of the power of the crown and the power of the great lords and even some of the lesser lords. And all that's culminating for him very early in his life. What do we suppose that he thought of his father becoming king?
I mean, I think, to your point, it's this sudden, almost literally overnight transformation. Jaehaerys goes from the second son of the fourth son of the late king to now Jaehaerys is second in line to the Iron Throne. Again, he's not the heir in this moment, but he is a few heartbeats away, and it's far from unprecedented, either in the history of House Targaryen or in Westerosi dynasties more generally, for a second son to become king. That is not unusual whatsoever. So is Jaehaerys thinking in this moment that I've become not just the son of a king, but I could be myself king someday? Again, not because he necessarily wants to be king in this moment, but because he knows this could happen. This is just a thing that could happen, is I am my father and older brother's heirs. If they die, I become king. And again, I think to go back to Bran and to some extent Rickon as well, they go through a similar transformation. They go from sons of the Lord of Winterfell to all of a sudden, they are new princes of House Stark. House Stark hasn't seen princes in centuries, and then all of a sudden, they're it, and they are Robb's heirs. If anything happens to Robb, that's it. They become king in the North instead. So I think it's this, on the one hand, this privilege and excitement of becoming the son of a king, but also potentially the sense of responsibility that now more is going to be expected of you, and potentially someday you could become king yourself.
Absolutely, and we can be very sure that even if he didn't realize it on his own, he would have been told. He would have been brought up to have this expectation that this would be a possible outcome for his life. Whether, like you said, there's a lot of ways he could end up being king even without anything too unlikely happening. There was another problem going on in this era, however. It wasn't happy times in the realm. There wasn't necessarily a lot of war. There was a little bit with that peak uprising there. And of course, the fourth Blackfyre rebellion was looming on the horizon, but constantly at all times was this really bad winter, because we had a long summer during Maekar's reign. And as we know, the farther the pendulum swings one way, the farther it swings back the other. So I think there was an understanding that the winter would be several more years, and that the king that they chose that's one of their first problems they'd have to deal with, and it wouldn't be something that would end anytime soon.
Absolutely. I mean, Aziz, are you suggesting that the winter that's here in the current books might be really bad because we've had a really long summer? It's almost like foreshadowing. Anyway, I think you're absolutely right. This is a winter that has already lasted for 3 years, and it doesn't show any signs of slowing down or stopping. And of course, Jaehaerys is the king's son, so he's not going to necessarily want himself. He's not going to go hungry because, again, he's the king's son. But it's very possible that Egg would have imposed restrictions on his family to say, I'm recognizing the suffering of my people. I'm going to devote resources that would have gone to the royal family to others throughout the realm because I know that the realm is suffering. We think about something like, the winter rations that Bowen Marsh recommends to Jon in A Dance with Dragons for the Night's Watch. He's like, look, we need to go on winter rations because we just don't have enough food to last as long of a winter as we might have. So we're going to have to start limiting what we're doing because otherwise we're not going to survive. And we do know from Yandel that Aegon did what he could, especially to help the North. And it's possible that part of this, and part of what Jaehaerys may have understood at this moment, is that Aegon isn't just being sympathetic to the North, although he certainly is, but he's also thinking of the North particularly as his kinsman because he's married to Betha Blackwood, who is a presumably sister or cousin of Melantha Blackwood, who is the mother of Lord Edwyle Stark. So whether or not Jaehaerys ever knew these, possibly distant Stark cousins of his, he certainly, I think, would have been aware that he has these kinsmen via the Blackwoods in the North. They are suffering, and his father is looking to help them.
Yeah, he and his brothers would have an unusually nuanced upbringing with regard to the old gods, having a mother who very likely was a follower of them from birth. So that's pretty unusual within House Targaryen and very noteworthy and pretty cool, actually. So there's, as we've been building onto here very gradually, there's a lot of different things that were part of his upbringing and his education, some of them intentional, some of them not, but a lot of them very meaningful. The next chapter in that education was the looming aforementioned Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion, which finally happened, I suppose because Bloodraven was gone, and maybe there was an idea that Aegon wasn't so strong, and of course the aforementioned winter. I'm using the word aforementioned a lot, but hey, we're talking history. That happens, right? And that's a big deal. This could have been a big problem. They may have expected that Bloodraven's murder of Aenys got them some sympathy, but either way, whatever their expectations actually were, they certainly did invade Daemon III Blackfyre with Bittersteel and the Golden Company and the rest. What happened with Jaehaerys in this era? We've talked about other characters in this spot, but never so much this guy.
And it's interesting because, and this is something that I almost forgot or didn't realize until I was doing the research for writing this episode, Jaehaerys was actually there during the Fourth Blackfyre Rebellion. This is something where Yandel specifically mentions that the king brought his sons to the battlefield. Now, I think it's very clear. Jaehaerys is 11 at this point. His brother Duncan probably isn't that much older, and Daeron's obviously younger. So I don't think they're in the midst of the fighting, actually picking up a sword, especially given Jaehaerys' physical frailty. But that's not really the point. That's not why they're here. They're here, number one, so that Aegon V can make a very clear statement, both to his own vassals as well as to the invading Blackfyres and Golden Company. He's saying, look at me. I am so confident in victory. I am bringing my children to this battlefield. I am bringing my heirs because I have no doubt that they will be safe and I will succeed. And he's also saying, you don't get to claim this legacy of Daemon Blackfyre. One of the famous stories of Daemon Blackfyre is Daemon bringing his twin sons to the Redgrass Field and how they're shot down by Bloodraven's arrows, and Daemon has to nobly stand over them according to the Blackfyres and take this rain of arrows because he doesn't want to leave his son's side. So I think Egg is sort of appropriating that a bit and saying, no, you're not the only ones who can bring your sons to a battlefield. We Targaryens have valor too. We bring our sons up in that as well. I'm going to bring my sons to the battlefield too. And of course, Egg himself had been on the battlefield with his own father. He was older, of course, than Jaehaerys was, but he fought with Maekar in the Third Blackfyre Rebellion. And at least according to a semi-canon source, he was there at the uprising at Starpike. So I think Egg is thinking, this is a great opportunity to start my son's martial education. They're gonna have to be blooded. They're gonna have to understand what it is to be on a battlefield. They're gonna have to experience this. You might as well start now.
Right. Yeah. It's a good opportunity to learn and to see things like their enemy's tactics, getting used to what it feels like, just the qualities of the tension and the anxiety and the fear that are all around you and the noise and everything. Just getting used to that, the horses and the dirt and the blood. There's a lot to get used to. Having not experienced it myself, I couldn't speak to the specifics, but I'm sure it's a lot. We don't know exactly what he saw. It wasn't exactly a long war, but if he was close enough, he might have seen a prime example of a Kingsguard, not for once being a shield, but a sword. Do we think that he actually could have witnessed Sir Duncan the Tall killing Daemon III in single combat? We're saying they were not that close, but maybe they were on a hill. I don't know. It's possible, right?
I think it's possible. At bare minimum, he definitely would have heard about it. He would have heard this story, because that would have been, I think, the moment of this battle. The idea that this major figure, this literally larger than life figure on the Kingsguard, who's been the king's best friend for as long as anyone can remember, and now he's doing the work to slay the invading Blackfyre pretender. You almost can't write the story better than that. So I think Jaehaerys, if he doesn't see it with his own eyes, I think he definitely would have heard about it pretty immediately after. And it's an interesting idea that he will certainly revisit or think about later in life when he himself has his own Blackfyre rebellion, and it's going to be another future stellar member of the Kingsguard who is going to end the Blackfyre pretender there.
Yeah, what a great example. What a thing to see if he got to see it. Also, no word on whether or not Sir Duncan slew Daemon III with his foot, but surely his foot helped. He may have also seen Bittersteel retreat. That's unclear, but it's hard to miss like an entire enemy army running away, so he would have seen to some extent that. And with the Golden Company banners being rather distinct, yeah, he might have been able to spot his cousin Bittersteel. Yeah, cousin, right? He's not like a great uncle or anything, is he?
All I'm thinking of is all I'm thinking of is Bart versus Australia, where they're gonna give Daemon III a booting.
He got booted right off his horse and into the grave.
Oh, that's a joke for my husband. He'll appreciate that.
Dunk was definitely speaking in an Australian accent when that went down. So even if Jaehaerys wasn't literally on or near that part of the battlefield, he definitely would have seen a lot. Aenys would have seemed like a vague figure, but this Daemon III is a different thing, right? Like it's you saw two opposite ends of the Blackfyre spectrum there, you could say maybe.
Absolutely. I mean, it's easy perhaps for Jaehaerys to think of Aenys as almost a theoretical threat, because he never really becomes a threat. He never makes this grand speech. He never leads an army. He shows up to be assassinated. It's not even clear if Jaehaerys ever physically saw him. He may have just heard of this happening. Whereas Daemon III, Jaehaerys would have seen him, or at very least seen his army. He was there for this. So I think Jaehaerys would have realized as he's on this battlefield, even as a young boy, assassinating Aenys, that did not stop this rebellion happening. The way to stop the Blackfyres is on the battlefield. That's the way that you defeat the Blackfyres. And that's something that I think Jaehaerys is going to take with him when he himself becomes king.
So within the first 15 years of his life, he had witnessed truly monumental changes to his family, to his dynasty, things swinging back and forth, and within the realm in terms of extreme weather. He had also seen his own fortunes change as far as his position within the dynasty and the line of succession. There were more changes to come later in his life, and some of them he would cause himself. You may be noticing a trend here that, yes, this guy isn't going to be on the throne very long, but he didn't die young. He had a fairly full life before he became king. That's something that very much separates him from some of the other kings that had very short reigns. Is for the most part, those were people that were also younger, not say Viserys II, but Daeron the First is a great example of that. Super young. His whole reign was, by the time he was dead, by the time he was 20 or so. Not so much Jaehaerys II.
No, absolutely. I mean, he's the opposite spectrum of someone like an Aegon III. They die at roughly the same age, but Aegon III has been king since he was a young boy. Virtually his entire life, he is king. Whereas someone like Jaehaerys spends virtually his entire life not being king. It's only a very small portion of his life, relatively speaking, that he actually reigns.
Yeah, I don't think anyone would call Aegon III fortunate either. Marriage, prophecy, and Summerhall. After Aegon V became king, he began to institute sweeping changes to law and justice within the Seven Kingdoms. He was a lot more focused on the lower classes. So, of course, those changes were not popular with the nobility. Their ancestral powers, which in their world have been held for really absurdly long times compared to our own lengths of time that we're working with in the real world. So they would just be that much more stubborn about holding on to what they considered their rights. So that was quite a situation for Aegon V. And we see him doing some things like making advantageous marriages, like the kings and queens would often do, but it didn't really go the way he wanted. They had Jaehaerys and his brothers, that is, his own family as a role model and as an example. So it's not too surprising that after a while, these things started to break down. But let's go into some detail here. In 237, Aegon V and Betha, Queen Betha, arranged these betrothals, and Jaehaerys' was to Celia Tully, daughter of the Lord of Riverrun. And what can we say about this?
It's an interesting betrothal. We don't know too much about this Celia Tully. She may have been the daughter of the same Lord of Riverrun who's the boy Lord of Riverrun when the Sworn Sword is taking place, but that's a little bit unclear. It's probable that she's maybe an aunt of Hoster and Brynden, so she would be great aunt to Catelyn and Lysa and Edmure. But again, we don't exactly know. I think it's an interesting match, and there's a clear, I think, political calculus to this. The Tullys were never kings in their own right, even before the conquest, but they had always been very powerful aristocrats within the Riverlands. And so this marriage between a daughter of House Tully and a son of House Targaryen is, by all means, very suitable. No one is going to look at this and think that Celia Tully is too low-ranking to marry a Targaryen. And in fact, it had been Aegon the Conqueror who had raised the Tullys to be the paramount lords in the Riverlands. That had not been their position prior to the conquest. And so I think there's always been, if not quite spoken aloud, this bond between the Tullys and the crown. And so now Aegon V is strengthening this bond. He's saying, look, my ancestor, my namesake, raised you up, and now I'm going to strengthen that bond. I'm going to underline our connection by uniting our families. And I think it also goes to Aegon V's political goals. What we hear about so much in The Sworn Sword, and to some extent in the Mystery Knight as well, is this breakdown of authority, and especially breakdown of authority in the Riverlands. That's a major facet that we learn about in The Sworn Sword. So Bracken and Blackwood are almost coming to war, and spoiler, I think that's going to come in a future Dunk and Egg Tale. And we hear about, Dunk says, well, what's going to happen? Can't Lord Tully do something? And Septon says, yeah, Lord Tully's 8. He's not going to do anything about this. There's no authority to govern the Blackwoods and the Brackens here. They're just going to go to blows, and it's gonna spill blood. And we know that at this point, Pennytree's become a royal fief roughly around this time. So I think that by betrothing Jaehaerys to Celia Tully, Aegon isn't just emphasizing the Tullys and the Targaryens are connected. He is planting a branch of House Targaryen in the Riverlands to say, look, my royal authority, that's paramount. You don't trespass against the royal authority. You don't have the right to have these private wars and to spill the blood of your peasants for no reason. And I'm going to put my second son in the Riverlands so that you all are aware this is my presence here. I am watching over you. You need to understand royal authority is paramount.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's really like a soothing measure, using your children, your princes and princesses to resolve difficulties within the realm. And I think you make a very strong case there that it's exactly what was happening. So, of course, we have to keep that in mind in reverse, because this marriage isn't going to happen. We can see the reasoning behind it and why they would have been looking forward to it, maybe even counting on it. And of course, it raises their status regardless of any of these other considerations. Becoming an in-law of the Targaryens is a huge deal. But, plans don't always go the way they were planned, as they say, or as I just said, myself and no one else ever has. That's right. Jaehaerys and Shera, it doesn't seem like it was a one-sided thing, right? They were kind of one mind about these betrothals not happening. They probably talked about it and maybe schemed and planned, and well, they succeeded, whatever they did, right?
That's absolutely right. I mean, we set up at the beginning, even from a young age, these two are very clearly drawn to each other. And we know that Aegon and Betha recognized this and tried to separate it. But what Yandel says is that distance only seemed to inflame the mutual passion of Jaehaerys and Shera. So I think the two of them were very much of one mind. I think they were both very aware, we do not want these arranged betrothals to happen. We want to marry each other. And so we are going to do what we believe is necessary to marry each other. And it doesn't really matter that our parents have arranged these betrothals for us.
Very much the Jaime and Cersei vibes all over this one. As we said, they just wouldn't obey. The puppets don't obey the puppet master, as we've seen explained a few times. So what else was going on besides love here? Or was there anything else going on besides love? And of course, the specific question that is perhaps the most tantalizing is, was it at all related to prophecy or any sort of supernatural ideas or beliefs?
I mean, it's such an interesting question, because on the one hand, it could just very simply be love. And George R. Martin loves that theme. It's his favorite theme in the whole world, the human heart in conflict with itself. The idea of choosing between love and duty, he demonstrates that again and again and again with characters. So the idea of having the future Jaehaerys II and his sister torn between the duty to marry these advantageous political fiancés that their parents have arranged for them and the love that they have for each other, that a tug of war between the two, that could very well be it. And that's an interesting story in itself, especially as children of a love match that was made only for love and not for, political advantage. And so I don't want to say that, there has to have been something else behind it. And I also don't think this is mutually exclusive either. I think both can be true at the same time. But I do think it's interesting to consider, was there any element to this, again, not mutually exclusive with the love, but that Jaehaerys has in his mind, by marrying my sister, this is going to be either the start of or the fulfillment of a supernatural or a prophetic legacy. I mean, we know that later down the line, Jaehaerys is going to be very receptive to prophetic direction when it comes to the marriage of his own children. And we also know that Jaehaerys seems like very similar to an Aenys-like figure, someone that is clever but sickly, clever but physically not imposing. And so, like Jaehaerys I, is Jaehaerys taking an interest in prophecy? Is he reading these arcane materials? Is he starting to think about, well, what is our future, supernaturally speaking, for House Targaryen? It's possible that as Jaehaerys is potentially doing this, as he's potentially thinking about prophecy, is he thinking about, I need to marry my sister because that's the way to bring back dragons, or that's the way to fulfill a different prophecy? I made the point back in the Baelor, the Blessed episodes, that the dragons and the doctrine of exceptionalism are inextricable. Once you have the latter, you can't separate it from the former. And, I made the point in that episode, I think Baelor saw the doctrine of exceptionalism as saying, incestuous marriages were a heresy, and that's why the gods took the dragons away from us. But I think that Jaehaerys may have grown up believing the opposite, that it's been almost a century by the time of his birth that the dragons have been gone. So is he looking at this and thinking, wait, we abandoned incestuous marriages, and that's the reason why we didn't have dragons anymore. We should have kept marrying incestuously, and then we could have gotten the dragons back. But because we abandoned that, we don't have dragons. Maybe. Certainly, he's growing up in a court where dragons and prophecy are more present than you might think. Daeron the Drunken is dreaming of the return of dragons. He may have even been doing this while Jaehaerys was alive. Aerys I is dead by the time Jaehaerys is born, but he himself was also reading about the return of dragons in a prophecy. And Egg is also trying to bring dragons back during the course of his reign. And so I think it's possible that, again, not mutually exclusively with love, Jaehaerys may have seen this marriage to his sister as saying, by doing this, maybe I put the dynasty on, prophetically speaking, the right track. Maybe I'm going to get us back in line so that we can have the return of dragons, so that we can fulfill some other prophetic end.
I agree with that. And maybe just to add one little point here, I think that something about Jaehaerys II we'll see that's a little more direct with his engagement with the prophecy. Only someone like perhaps Rhaegar was so truly engaged with it that it consumed them, or that they believed in it at that deep a level. I think in my headcanon, Egg was never a true believer, but someone that saw the practicality of it. But of course, who knows what kind of person he became as an adult. That's just maybe some of my own bias in there. But regardless of that, Jaehaerys was extremely hands-on with it in ways that other members of his family weren't. And we even have characters like Bloodraven who may have had something to say here and there. Even though Jaehaerys wasn't around as an adult for Bloodraven, his influence would have been still there if it had been such a short period of time. So there's an enormous number of people that could have influenced him, enormous amount of positive vibes around it. Like people think, hey, this is a good thing. This is what we Targaryens are trying to do. And it's also a overarching theme of the post-Draconic era for them, is just whether it's latching on to the faith or latching on to something like this, like prophecies, they're trying to get back to or a level of power that they had before, or at least something resembling that. And the dragons would be the best possible result of all that. But coming back to the realm of the more mundane, the natural rather than supernatural, the politics here, ooh boy, this caused a big problem, didn't it?
It sure did, because, Jaehaerys is planning and eventually orchestrating this marriage to his sister, obviously with Jaehaerys in on it, immediately after his brother had also abandoned his politically advantageous betrothal for a marriage for love. Duncan had been betrothed to the daughter of Lionel Baratheon, and in 239, instead he marries Jenny of Oldstones, a commoner from the Riverlands. And this is shocking. Not only that Duncan has married a commoner, but instead of giving her up, he says, fine, I will abandon my role as crown prince. I give it up. I do not want the throne anymore. I only want Jenny. You, Jaehaerys, you can be heir now. You can be Prince of Dragonstone because I would rather be married to Jenny. This is a bombshell, politically speaking, because not only is Jaehaerys immediately made the heir to the Iron Throne, but now the crown has to manage the hurt feelings of Lionel Baratheon, which turned into a rebellion where Lionel declares himself a new Storm King. And this is a short, bloody rebellion that follows, according to Yandel. Yes, the crown comes out on top, but it's not a good look for anyone. Egg eventually has to give his younger daughter to Lionel's heir in order to assuage hurt feelings, and they're left with this legacy of the heir to the Iron Throne snubbing a Baratheon maiden to marry a commoner.
That would have seemed unthinkable until it actually happened, but it certainly did. You're right, this is quite a lot at once. There's these dynastic marriages, multiples of them falling apart. And while Jaehaerys, he wouldn't have fought in the war, as we said. He wasn't really capable of that, but he may have been on the battlefield again. And even if he wasn't, he certainly would have been involved in both councils deciding the course of the war and how to establish a peace and all these negotiations and all that. That would be right up his alley regardless. What do we think his mindset was with regard to this? Do we think he was aware of the problem he would cause, or that they would cause, really, and just figured they could get away with it, it wouldn't be that bad, or maybe they could make up for it later, or something like that? I mean, at this point, they knew they were going to be king and queen, because, like you said, their brother had already done his thing. He'd already set aside the crown. So that's a huge change in and of itself, them being the heirs. Maybe that's it. Maybe there's a little bit of, hey, once we're king and queen, we'll make up for all that. Well, whatever harm we cause. What do you think was in their heads?
It's fascinating. And, you wish we would have a POV or something inside Jaehaerys and Shira's head, because this is a, very weighty moment for them, because you're absolutely right. They would have been aware. What they're going to be doing is another bombshell, because now they're insulting two aristocratic families by marrying each other. So Jaehaerys knows, I'm going to be king after my brother. My father and I will have to deal with this political fallout. If I marry Shira, it's very possible that the Tullys and or Tyrells go to war over this. And yet they do it anyway. They are fully aware of what could happen, and they still go through with it. And again, I think part of it may be that favorite theme of George's, the love versus duty, that when it comes to love, characters will do anything, and they will break any sort of duty they might have for the sake of other characters that they love. I think it comes down to that. But I think also, in a practical sense, Jaehaerys may have been thinking, well, my case is different from that of Duncan. Duncan married a commoner. Shaera is a princess, so no one can say on a dynastic level that Shaera is an insult compared to either Celia Tully or Luther Tyrell. I think also Jaehaerys may have thought, well, Egg wasn't personally that hard on Duncan. He implored Duncan to give Jenny up, but once Duncan said, I'll abdicate as Prince of Dragonstone, I will forswear my claim, Egg let him keep him. Let Duncan keep Jenny. And that's very different from something we see like Tywin with Tyrion and Tysha. Tywin did not care that marriage had been consummated. Tywin did whatever Tywin did to make sure that marriage was put aside. So the fact that Egg theoretically could have done something like that and didn't may have given some hope to Jaehaerys and Shaera to say, well, Dad hopefully won't be too mad at us. He won't be too hard on us because he wasn't that hard on Duncan. And I think that maybe he's thinking if we do this and we present it as sort of this fait accompli marriage and we say we're in love and Shaera is a princess and we can be a good king and queen, Egg will accept it and the realm will accept it.
Yeah, it certainly was a risk. Maybe I agree with you that maybe they thought the risk was smaller than it turned out to be. But then, of course, the other marriage didn't happen either. So Daeron did not marry his bride-to-be, which was Olenna Redwine, by the way, y'all. That's a fun little trivia tidbit for you. So indeed, it wasn't also not the first time either. There's a few examples in the past, aren't there, of Targaryens pulling something like this, and one of them is particularly parallel, isn't it?
It is, and I think that as Jaehaerys and Shaera are doing this, I cannot think that they were not themselves remembering the example of Jaehaerys and Alysanne, because it is almost a perfect parallel. They are almost exactly the same age that Jaehaerys and Alysanne were. Jaehaerys and Alysanne were both, betrothed or about to be betrothed to politically arranged fiancés. They both loved each other and loved each other from an early age. And what did they do? They ran away together and eloped on Dragonstone. And I think that that's what Jaehaerys and Shaera had in mind, that we're going to be the new Jaehaerys and Alysanne. And hey, they lasted and they became a great king and queen, so why won't it work out for us? And they may have also been thinking of, well, after that, we see something like Rhaena Targaryen. She marries Andro Farman in secret so that she doesn't have to have a, politically arranged marriage. We get Rhaenyra. She marries her uncle Daemon shortly after they are both widowed or become a widower. We have Baela Targaryen. She marries Alan Valerian because her half-brother's council is trying to arrange a marriage for her. And so they may have been thinking, well, there have been these other marriages. There have been these other examples. Let's just do that. If we are truly in love, then let's do it.
And we could look at the other side of this coin, but there's nothing there because we don't have an example when a couple was separated like this and the separation was successful. They always got back together. Even when we're talking Jaime and Cersei, who were separated by, a San Francisco amount of length there. It just took them longer. Mm-hmm. So they were 15 and 14, as far as we know, in the year 240 when they got married. And we don't know where, though. We were lacking some details. It may have been kind of a runaway thing like their namesake there, or like one of their namesakes. It's not Alysanne again, but hey, like you said, definitely a very strong chance they were influenced by that story and wanted to repeat their famous ancestors' actions there, given the similar circumstances. So what do we basically think happened, though, as far as the getting married, like the logistics of it?
I mean, to your point, we know basically nothing other than it happened. I would like to think that this happened on Dragonstone, not only because Jaehaerys was now Prince of Dragonstone, so it would have been very natural if Jaehaerys says, I want to go to Dragonstone because that is my seat as Prince of Dragonstone. No one's going to necessarily look at him and say, that doesn't make any sense. And also on a practical level, it's somewhere that they can run away to that's relatively close to the Red Keep and yet far enough away that by the time that news gets back, it's going to be too late for the king and queen. But we don't really know. It could have also been at just a friend's home or castle. They could have just run away to someone who was sympathetic to them. and, gotten married there. We think of something like Robb and Jane Westerling. They get married at the Crag because that's where Robb is, and that's where, he and Jane get together. So it's very possible it could have been somewhere else as well. I think really the important point is they're going to need a septon and they're going to need witnesses. And as long as they have those things and the marriage is consummated, by Westerosi standards, that's a marriage. That's really not something that you're going to be able to successfully put away, at least not without a lot of effort.
Agreed. They would definitely need to have some witnesses. That's something that matters. One way or the other, that would make sure that the elopement is successful. We don't get a full sense of the fallout from either the Tullys or the Tyrells. We obviously get plenty in the terms of the Baratheons. We do delve into some of it in our House Tully history episodes, so check that out if you're interested. But this is something where there's a lot of room to imagine and guess that it certainly affected things in the future. For example, the Tullys were very staunch throughout history. The first time they ever turned against House Targaryen was Robert's Rebellion. So maybe this is part of what led to that. You think that's possible or even likely?
I feel like I'm looking at that meme of the guy who sets up all the bricks, and there's like the one brick at the beginning, and it's like Jaehaerys runs away with his sister, and the end brick is House Tully replaces the Targaryens with the Baratheons. So I feel like it's a little bit of that. But I do think, could there be this is the beginning of hurt feelings? Yes, absolutely. I think that, we know obviously the king has no more children to give over like he did with the Baratheons. So we obviously would have had to do something. I'm going to assume it's a combination of making some sort of payments to them, giving them some sort of court functions, maybe giving over some additional lands, maybe marrying them to extended members of the family. So again, we talk about the marriages of egg sisters. It's possible that they would have married, some of the Tarts or some of Ray's children. And I do think it's worth noting that Daeron meets Jeremy Norridge, who's later appears to be his partner, when they're squires together at Highgarden. So I think it's possible that Daeron was sent to Highgarden as a way of mollifying the Tyrells, to say, look, we know that you were wronged by the breaking of this betrothal, so here, you can have Daeron as a squire. He will live there. He will be raised by you. He will grow up, treating the Tyrells as sort of his brothers and sisters.
Jaehaerys and Shera would go on to have two children, Aerys in 244 and Rhaella sometime between 245 and 247. So short range there, but we don't know exactly. And it's certainly an interesting choice to name your child Aerys, given what the previous Aerys represented and what has been a big theme of this episode is the supernatural interest that Jaehaerys II had.
I agree. I mean, I don't think it's coincidental that the first heiress who reigns in the history of the Targaryen dynasty is this figure who is physically weak but intelligent and interested in sorcery and the arcane. And then a generation later, or 2 generations later, the future Jaehaerys II names his son and the future king Aerys. I think he is definitely thinking about prophecy. I think he's thinking about the supernatural. I think Jaehaerys is thinking this is going to be someone who fulfills what the first Aerys was doing, not just, regnally, not just in terms of being the next Aerys in regnal number, but also fulfills that in a prophetic sense, that what Aerys the first looked at, this is what the second Aerys is going to do.
So there's a decent amount of time here after Jaehaerys' and Shera's marriage that would have been part of their lives during their father's reign here. In 245, Rhaelle married Ormond. That was, of course, a fallout from the little Laughing Storm rebellion there. He wasn't laughing during that, though. He was pretty mad. He was frowning during that. And do you think maybe there's a connection between this name here? It's Rhaelle and Rhaelle here. That might have been a connection, right?
I think that's very, very possible, if not probable. I mean, there's any number of Rays and Rhaelles in this era, so it could just be that this is just a common name in House Targaryen in this era. But the fact that Rhaella is born right about the same time that Rhaelle is getting married, I think that may be a bit of a tribute by Jaehaerys to his sister.
Yeah, I believe that. And what about here in 247? He got to witness a certain coming out of a future famous knight, didn't he?
He did. This is the origin story of Barristan Selmy. So 247, Barristan attempts to joust against Prince Duncan at Blackhaven. Barristan is a young boy, and Barristan himself, thinking back on it later, thinks, I looked ridiculous. I was ridiculous. Someone should have just, taken me out of that, but instead they let me do it. And of course, he fails almost immediately because he's just a young boy and he's going up against an adult knight. But that's when, he gets this moniker. He's a brave boy. And while Jaehaerys probably wasn't jousting, again, I don't think he was really trained in or formally knighted. I think it's very possible that he was there as a spectator to support his brother, to be there as a representative of House Targaryen. And I think that, if he's seeing Barristan, Jaehaerys obviously doesn't know what's going to happen with Barristan in the future, but it's interesting for him to think many years later, this bold boy who's jousting when, he's barely even squire age and going up against my brother, he's going to be the one to help save House Targaryen.
Yeah, it does come around nicely. On the not-so-fun side for Jaehaerys and the rest of the family, there was a rebellion by the mysterious rat, hawk, and pig, one of the most hard-to-understand enemies of House Targaryen. It's really unclear who these people were, but they certainly did some damage.
They did. I mean, this is a uprising that we really don't get a lot of detail about. We do know that the crown is victorious, but unfortunately, Prince Daeron is killed during this uprising. Again, I don't think Jaehaerys was on the battlefield. It's possible he was, but I don't tend to think he was there. He was the heir to the throne at this point, and he certainly wasn't a physically imposing figure in the same way that his brother, who loved tournament and battle, was. We also don't get a sense of how close personally Daeron and Jaehaerys were, but it is interesting to think about what Jaehaerys would have thought about Daeron's death. I mean, Daeron had followed his two brothers in saying, I don't want to have this politically advantageous betrothal, although he himself never married. He said, I'm not marrying, I'm going to spend my life as a warrior and with Jeremy Norridge. And so Jaehaerys would have known that when Daeron dies, that's it. There are no more brothers. There are no more princes of House Targaryen who are going to continue on the dynasty. His branch is it. That's who will be House Targaryen in the future. It is just his line. And I think also Jaehaerys may have been looking at Daeron and thinking, Daeron dies a warrior's death. He's 23 years old. He can always be remembered as this young, dashing Targaryen martyr, someone who dies fighting the enemies of the crown. And Jaehaerys may be thinking, well, what's my future look like? I will never have that future. So can I, in a strange way, live up to that? Can I, if I ever fail as king, if I'm ever not doing well as king, the natural thought is going to be, well, who would have done better? Daeron. Daeron would have done better than this. Oh, but Daeron died, and now we've got you. And so I think that it's potentially Jaehaerys thinking, well, I not only have to live up to that, but also maybe this is also confirming some ideas supernaturally. That if Daeron is never going to have descendants, and there's not going to be any dynastic descendants of Duncan, then it's my line. If something's going to happen with House Targaryen, it's going to happen with my descendants. So maybe in a strange sort of way, it's reemphasizing the importance of my descendants. These are going to be the ones who bring back the dragons or fulfill some sort of other prophecy. Yeah,
it really narrows it down even more. It's like, who else could this even happen through? If it's going to happen for House Targaryen, well, it has to be our children, even when that's seemingly confirmed later by a certain smallish person who we will discuss in a moment. Also, given the Blackfyre threat, it would have been nice for Jaehaerys and Cher to have their brother Daeron around to lead their armies and do all that sort of thing, but alas, it was not to be. And here are some of our Patreon supporters. From the depths of Fleabottom, Lord Ken of House Hammer has declared for Queen Carrie, Fire of the North, who recovered Dark Sister from beyond the wall. Our sellsword captains, Haema Helminth, Captain of the Whispering Children, Dead Men Tell No Secrets. Shepherd, the Shepherd of Essos, all men are sheep before the shepherd, heir to the Whispering Children. Lady Lajara Dajo, the Iron Lily, Master Archer, Castellan of the Summer Island Keep Arboreal Point, Captain of the all-female Wailing Widows, Women and Children First. Lord Brandon Brewer of Castle Blackroon, Captain of the Shadow Wolves, Our Steel is Cold, Our Vengeance Colder. Master Malachi, Forgotten Dragon Seed from the Isle of Driftmark, now in service to House Harlaw. Stives the White, captain of the Hopeful Patriots, a band of exile knights. The world ends when hope dies. Our Ironborn captains, Black Matos Stormrider, captain of the Rusted Hinge. Lord Chucklaws, captain of the Dromon Nightblood, destroyer of evil. Eileen Archer Queen, captain of the Border Collie. Catherine the Cruel, captain of the Kraken's Claw. Lana Del Relay, Death Dreamer, captain of the Cyclopean Call. Nadia Storm, mother of worms and wyverns, captain of the Stygian Darkness. Hara Darkcharm, known as Lady Bad Luck, captain of the Black Cat and Prowler of the Seas. Lydia the Drowner, a.k.a. Lydia the Kraken, captain of Green Smile, a longship decorated with the rotting skulls of dead foes. And your secret Targaryen, captain of Boriqua Macheteros. One event that we don't have a specific date for, not even that much of a range for, is the prophecy of the future Ghost of Highheart. What we're told by Yandel is that Jenny of Oldstones was accompanied to court by a dwarfish albino woman who was reputed to be a woods witch in the Riverlands. In some ways, it's kind of unbelievable that any of this mattered, that this was advice that they took. But the Ghost of Highheart has the ability to prove herself very easily and quickly, so it's not hard in that sense to believe she's convincing.
And I think that, there may be this sort of almost mystique, I guess, for lack of a better term, in terms of having this woods witch, because we hear about Jenny. Jenny's obviously a commoner from the Riverlands, but Jenny herself is saying, well, actually, I'm a descendant of the first men kings of the Riverlands. And even in her own time, she's thought of as this sort of half-wild girl who's sort of living alone mysteriously. So I think when Jenny brings the Ghost of Highheart to court, it's really just sort of part of that appearance and aura and mystique about Jenny herself, in that, well, if you're gonna be this mysterious descendant of the kings of the first men, this sort of ancient time of heroes, well, of course you'd have your own prophet with you who herself looks sort of supernatural. And to your point, can prove what she's dreaming about. The credentials are there for her.
It almost validates Duncan and Jenny. They're like, well, we don't need to have kids. It's going to be your kids that matter, right? Yeah, that's it. But why would he listen to her in the first place? This isn't, other than her ability to predict things that we said like she does in the books, these are still not far-ranging grand things on this scheme, I suppose. I would guess that maybe he needed some more convincing, or was he maybe just that into it that he was ready to believe? He was being told what he wanted to hear, or something along those lines.
I think it's sort of meeting in the middle. I think it's someone who has genuine prophetic ability meeting someone who genuinely wants to believe in prophecy and is living in a court where the prophecy and the supernatural are very much out in the present. And so the idea that I do very much believe that at this point, Jaehaerys is interested in prophecy, is interested in the return of dragons, is interested in fulfilling the supernatural destiny of House Targaryen. I think it's very possible that Jaehaerys is meeting the Ghost of Highheart and thinking, well, this just confirms it. Of course. I mean, if she's saying it and she's a genuine, real for real seer, that makes sense. That fits with everything, because I've been reading about it. I've been hearing about it. My great uncle was prophesying about it. My uncle was dreaming about it. And now we've got a woman talking about it. So the idea that now he's hearing the Ghost of Highheart say the prince that was promised is going to be born of Aerys and Rhaella's line, I think Jaehaerys is thinking, yeah, that adds up, because dragons are supposed to be hatching. We've all, so many members of the family have foreseen this happening, dreamed about it happening, read about it happening, and the prince that was promised is gonna need dragons. So yeah, that all adds up. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, and it kind of does, doesn't it? At least you can see from their perspective why it would. But what would they be thinking in that moment, hearing that it was their descendants that would fulfill this destiny? Do you think that gave them a sense of pride or of duty? Or was it just something, like you said, they were kind of already expecting it? They had already maybe figured a lot of it out, and this was more of a confirmation than a revelation.
I think that it's an interesting question, because on the one hand, I think you have this idea of potential excitement, because how would you not be excited if you're thinking that a hero who has been prophesied for thousands of years, since the time of Valyria, is going to be born potentially in the next generation. That's incredibly exciting. You're living in your own new age of heroes. How could you not look forward to that? And yet, at the same time, is Jaehaerys thinking, well, this is kind of a big burden on me because now, not only am I going to have to be king someday, but now my potential grandson is is going to be the apocalyptic savior of the world. Like, that's not just being raised to be Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. That's being raised to literally save the world. And I have to arrange that. Like, I have to make that happen. I have to make sure that that happens because if I don't, the world ends. No pressure.
But yeah, I don't know how you process that, right? Just, okay. So, yeah, we can handle that, right? Whoa. Yeah, and it's also really interesting to compare the scenarios that happen fairly close together, or maybe happen close together. This did probably happen before Summerhall, almost certainly, but it also shows a different approach. This also doesn't seem to necessarily connect to the events of Summerhall, maybe the thinking behind it, but not the process. And what I think might be at work here is not only did Jaehaerys and Shera differ from their parents on marriage strategy and the importance of perhaps traditional marriage in this sense for what it means to Targaryens, but in how they interpret the prophecy, things like that. There might have been a difference, a substantial difference in what Aegon V believed was the way to bring dragons back in the world versus what Jaehaerys believed. And that could explain a bit more of why they didn't seem to be turned off by the pursuit even after Summerhall. You might think that would slow them down a little bit, but it didn't really, did it?
When the fate of the world is on the line, are you going to be stopped by a little thing like, a big fire?
Everyone dying? No, that's not a problem. Where they're already, hey, everyone's going to die if we don't do this, so it's, why not? So what do we think as well about the revelation that Aerys and Rhaella had to marry? Do you think that was probably just no big deal? They did it themselves. They were kind of already like that, but maybe Aerys and Rhaella weren't so thrilled about it. They may have had to have some convincing, like neither Aerys and Rhaella later in life seemed to, from what we know, be like prophecy people. I mean, Aerys had all sorts of other problems, but it didn't seem to be a prophecy guy. It didn't seem to be a very supernatural guy. So I'm not sure that they were behind the reasons for their own marriage. What do you think?
Well, and I mean, that's the thing, which again comes into the love versus duty and the human heart in conflict with itself that I think George R. R. Martin loves exploring here. This is a couple, Jaehaerys and Shera, who have married for love. Like, no question, whether or not there was any additional supernatural element to it, they have married for love in defiance of their parents' wishes. And now, Jaehaerys, and presumably to some extent Shera as well, are telling their own children, you don't get to marry for love. You in fact, you have no choice in who you're going to marry. You're going to marry each other. You don't like it? Too bad. That's what's going to happen. And so there's a way in which I think, and, to some extent validly, this is hypocritical on its face. This is them saying, yeah, we don't really care that we married for love. You're going to do as we say. And I wonder to what extent did Jaehaerys wrestle with that? Did he think about, is it fair for me to do this? Is it right for me to do this? So is he thinking, it doesn't matter because this is what prophecy demands. This is what I have to do. Again, if the fate of the world is on the line, are you gonna get a little thing like love in the way? No, you're not gonna do that. You're going, potentially, according to Jaehaerys, you're gonna say, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna tell you to do whatever you need to do, because if you don't, the world's gonna end. And to what extent Aerys and Rhaella appreciated that or thought about that or agreed with that, we don't know. I agree with you. I don't think they have a lot of interest in prophecy, at least from the little that we know. They certainly don't seem to have been interested in each other, because that's, Barristan is very clear with Dany about that they did not wish to marry each other. Mm-mm. But I don't think Jaehaerys cared. I think Jaehaerys thought that kind of thought is secondary if the question is the apocalyptic savior of the world.
Yeah, I think it's a tough thing to have to manage, even though, as you said, it comes off as very hypocritical. But it is what it is, and that's what happened, and they had to go along with it. It wasn't like Aegon V and Betha where they caved. This is a forced marriage that definitely went through. There was no eloping or anything like that. And Aegon himself was still alive at this point. This is before, of course, Summerhall, so he was alive, and he was not happy with this. He did not like it, but not only had he gone along with it for his own kids, he went along with it for his grandkids. So that sort of tracks, I suppose. He's not going to protest the second one so much if he let the first one happen. I guess that he believed that the Targaryen incestuous marriages did more harm than good, but maybe he was, like we said, open to other possibilities, and maybe some of this was related to prophecy. It is kind of interesting to note how, Aerys and Rhaella don't seem to have had prophecy interest, but obviously Rhaegar did, and obviously Daenerys is the person that it's all spoken of or about, so she's living it. It does mean that there would have been a nice connection between them, Jaehaerys, Rhaegar, and Dany. They could have all had some nice conversations,
It really is too bad that Dany never knew her grandfather. I think they could have had some very interesting conversations.
Yeah, and I think we might not even get her grilling of Barristan about it. Like, that dude may not live long enough to tell her the things that she put off. Why did she put it off? That's the thing here. Jaehaerys is like I made the metaphor that he's like the Red Comet of Targaryen kings, but he's also like George's interruption method, where he's explaining some supernatural lore and then someone interrupts it and we don't get the end of it. His life was like that. This dude was all about the supernatural, and then he just dies. Yeah, all right, before he could get that deep into it. So, you said it pretty well here that Egg's reign had a lot of frustrations, both in what he was trying to do politically and what he was trying to do with his family, who really did not help his political goals at all, given not just because of the breaking of the betrothals, but for some other reasons as well.
I think by, the late, mid-late 250s, I think Egg is just tired. I think he is just tired. He is getting middle-aged, if not even, close to old by Westerosi standards. He came to the throne probably very idealistic, very much thinking, look at all these reforms I'm going to make. I'm going to make life better for everyone. I'm going to bring justice to everyone in Westeros. And what has he found? Pushback, argument, rebellion, fighting. Even from his own children, he can't get them to do what he wants. And so by 20 odd years later, I think he's just tired. I think he thinks, I'm done fighting. I can't pick so many battles anymore. The battle I want to pick at this point is dragons. Like, if I can get dragons, if I can just do that, fine. Jaehaerys, you want your children to marry? Fine. I won't argue, as long as I can get dragons, as long as I can get this moving, because that's the thing that will make all of this make sense. I think that's genuinely what was in Aegon's mind.
I agree, and I think that we have to look at this like a family. These aren't two ideological differences playing out at a distance. These are arguments played out at a dinner table. Right? These are things that they would have, like you said, he might have gotten tired of because Jaehaerys would have been very sure of himself. It's what he comes off as, very sure of himself on these things. And perhaps Shera was as well. So he might have been getting double teamed by his children here over what they believed the proper steps to take here was with regards to the supernatural, with regards to prophecies. And he may not have been so interested in any of it. He may have been very opposed to some of their ideas. It's hard to say, but it does seem that there were disputes beyond the fallout from the betrothals. It seems like there were some other troubles at home, shall we say. And this might, in fact, be why Aerys and Rhaella weren't that interested in prophecy. They grew up hearing people argue about it all the time. They might have been quite sick of it by the time they got older. Like, man, father and grandfather would just go at it over that. I'm so over it. And Rhaegar's like, what? I'm so interested in this, because he didn't have to grow up with any of that. He only grew up in a fire, having been born in a cataclysm. That's a bit of a different thing, huh? It's not exactly clear when Aerys and Rhaella married, but it was before Summerhall, and they weren't exactly very old. So the window is pretty narrow. It was around 258, Summerhall being the next year. So either way, that's pretty young. But on the other hand, the dynasty is thin at this point, so you can understand why they were maybe pushing it. And they may have been literally pushing it, because as we said, it doesn't seem like Aerys and Rhaella wanted this, so they weren't exactly jumping into bed eagerly here. So, yeah, it's a lot of pressure.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, this is And I think it's hard, at least for me, it's hard for me not to feel, the sense of anger or resentment against Jaehaerys because Rhaella is so very young. Why are you pushing her into this young? It doesn't make sense. I think the only potential explanation, which is not a justification, is that Jaehaerys genuinely believes, I need to get this going. I need to get the prince that was promised going, because clearly if this is being prophesied as the descendant of Aerys and Rhaella, that means potentially the apocalypse is nigh. Like, it is coming soon. And I need to get this going because we can't have a baby being the leader of the world during an apocalyptic crisis. So, Rhaella, you gotta get this going. But whatever, explanation Jaehaerys used, again, Rhaella is extremely young, even by Westerosi standards, to be pregnant and giving birth to her first child. So it's, I think there is a sense of callousness on Jaehaerys' part. And, maybe in the kindest reading, which is, again, not particularly kind in my feeling, we see him as someone perhaps like a Rhaegar, who is marrying Elia and having multiple children. It's despite the fact that it's, extremely difficult for Elia after her first child, because Rhaegar believes, I need these children. And if I've been prophesied to have them, then it'll be fine. Yeah, clearly everything should be fine if I've been prophesied to have one. So, get to it. I think that may have been something similar in Jaehaerys' mind. Not a justification for me, but that I think is what he's saying.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's very likely. And I think there's a bit of arrogance in that because, yes, he believes sincerely that the prince that is promised will be born of their line. I said princess because that's who it turned out to be. But there's no reason to rush it. If it's going to happen, why take the chance of screwing it up by having your daughter pregnant too young? It's very much Rhaegar Baratheon and Alyssa Velaryon again, but in reverse. She was too old for it. Same concept, though, or the TV show's version of Viserys and Aemma. So it's a theme that's been used a few times, the pushing of the prophecy too much and perhaps overconfidence bordering into zealotry, or maybe that word is too strong. Maybe arrogance is a better word to settle on. Because, it doesn't have to happen in their lifetime. It just has to happen. At the end of Aegon V's reign, the end, meaning the end in flame, the Blackfyres rose again to become a threat. They took advantage of what they thought was an opportunity. And I guess it kind of was an opportunity. Not as much of one as they hoped, but certainly it was a close run thing, as we're told.
Absolutely. I mean, we hear about this band of 9 who's gathering in the Free Cities. Maelys Blackfyre is the representative, and at this point, presumably the last male line member anyway, of Blackfyres. And he's gathering with these other adventurers, for lack of a better term, and they're promising, we're going to get each other kingdoms. We're going to get each other crowns. We'll all band together as this band of 9, and we will make sure that we all are wearing crowns at the end of the day. And we hear from In the World of Ice and Fire that Aegon V and Jaehaerys initially don't think very much of this band of 9, and especially of Maelys. And I think there's maybe a few reasons for that. It had been the better part of 20 years since the last Blackfyre invasion, and that had been stopped very quickly. So I think that this had been a very long stretch of time where the Blackfyres really hadn't appeared as a threat. Yes, they still existed. Yes, the Targaryens were very much aware of them, but I think the Targaryens may have decided, Blackfyres are done with us. They've realized that invading isn't going to get them anywhere. So let them have their little kingdom over the sea. That's fine. As long as they're not touching our soil, we don't really care. And I think that Jaehaerys may have, and to some extent Aegon V as well, may have seen Maelys as, by this point, a true foreigner, someone who is both physically as well as dynastically just too far away to pose a threat to the Targaryen dynasty. I mean, there are no other Blackfyres left, as far as we know. Maelys is the last of that male line. And so Jaehaerys may have thought, problem will solve itself in a couple of years. Maelys will, get killed in some battle in the disputed lands, and then that'll be the end of it. That's the end of House Blackfyre. No one's gonna follow a female Blackfyre to sit on the Iron Throne. We'll be fine. And it's also possible that Jaehaerys thought, well, my dad's not old. Yes, he's, almost 60, but that's not ancient by Westerosi standards. It's very possible Egg still has 5-10 years of life left, if not more. So
Sure.
this really isn't going to be my problem in the near future. I can let my dad deal with this, and if the Blackfyres are still a problem in 10 years, well, that's 10 years from now's problem.
Yeah, he was probably more focused on Summerhall. That wasn't something that probably just popped up overnight. It was something that was planned for quite a while, most likely the setup, the whatever that involved, the planning, everyone traveling to be there. Jaehaerys having an interest in the supernatural, he would certainly be more interested in this than the Blackfyres, even though that's something that's been with him all his life. This is something that he wants. This is something that he's excited about, something that he assumes is going to happen at some point, and he might think it's going to happen here, but for different reasons. What do we think his general sense would have been coming up to Summerhall? Would he have been optimistic, or maybe are we of more the mind that he didn't agree with his father on these methods, as we alluded to earlier, and that he just thought it would be maybe more of a regular failure, not a spectacular failure like this? It's hard to believe anyone predicted this exactly.
I genuinely think that Jaehaerys may have been excited about Summerhall, may have been encouraging Summerhall, because I think Jaehaerys genuinely believed my grandson is going to be the prince that was promised. This is a gathering, ostensibly, to celebrate the birth of that grandson. So, yeah, why not? This will be sort of the grand, literal and figurative coming out party of the prince that was promised. This is this first celebration. This is a hero has been born, a savior for the world has been born for House Targaryen, and it's my grandson. And because Egg is clearly focused on hatching dragons at this, he's gathering not just dragon eggs together, but also all the members of House Targaryen that he can together to have them, to add whatever supernatural power that does. I think Jaehaerys is thinking, yeah, this makes sense. My grandson, the prince that was promised, is going to be born at the exact same time the dragons are going to hatch into the world again. They're obviously both linked, the prince that was promised and dragons. This figure and dragons are always linked in these prophecies. So, yeah, makes sense to me. Let's go. Let's do it. This will be a big celebration. This will be the start of the fulfillment of this prophecy. It's
possible we should be considering that Jaehaerys had a bigger role in Summerhall than we've prior theorized, because, yeah, obviously it's Aegon V's decision, and it was probably his idea in the first place, but a lot of the details and the working through it all may have been on Jaehaerys, or just from his influence. He may have pushed a lot of it or had a lot of ideas. It certainly would fit. We obviously can't be sure of something like that, but I think it's an idea that has some merit to it. But of course, what actually happened was a horrible tragedy that Jaehaerys and Shera were able to escape. They were among the people to get out, along with Aerys and Rhaella. We're not entirely sure if there were any other members of the family who weren't there, but we certainly have a long list of people that were and died there. So that changed his perspective quickly. What you said a few moments ago is that he thought he maybe had some time. Very quickly, he learned he did not.
I don't know what exactly Jaehaerys expected to happen at Summerhall, but whatever he thought was going to happen, it definitely wasn't a conflagration that was going to claim the lives of most of the attendees of Summerhall. And honestly, probably almost claimed his life too. This seems like a really devastating fire, so I can imagine that Jaehaerys was afraid for his life as well, although obviously he got out. And so it's hard to think about, what was his reaction to this? That I think, in a way, he may have thought, like, this isn't right. This isn't what was supposed to happen. What was supposed to happen is that the prince that was promised is born, and everyone's excited, and we've got dragons in the world again, and this is the beginning of prophecy. And now instead, we've got, yes, his grandson has been born. Yes, his grandson is healthy, but his father is dead. His older brother is dead. His sister-in-law, Jenny, is dead. There are presumably other members of the family who attended who also died. He and his wife and their 2 children and now their baby grandson are among the very few survivors. And now also he himself is king and he has to take over. So I think that this is going from what should have been this acme for Jaehaerys, this celebration of I was right about the prophecy all along. Look at that. And now it's, wait a second, what is this supposed to mean? How do I interpret this in the context of because clearly the prophecy still has to be true somehow. So how does all of this make sense? How does this all fit together that we get the prince that was promised in the end?
Yeah, it must have been at least a mental setback of lack of understanding, unless we had the right of it when theorizing that he didn't agree with what his father was doing here in terms of methods, even though he certainly agreed with the hopeful outcome there. So, yeah, it was a hopeful celebration of life. At the very least, they expected, okay, well, maybe our dragons won't be born, but we'll have a prince born or a princess, and that's a good thing. But instead, yeah, what happened. Rain. It must have been a really sad return to King's Landing. I mean, you have the untimely death of a king. That's bad enough, but this was so much worse. The expected outcome versus the bare minimum, right? Like, they could have gotten a dragon or two out of it. Maybe that wasn't the widespread expectation, but at least the birth of a new royal, they thought that would be a nice thing to celebrate. But wow, just nothing good at all about that.
No, absolutely not. And I can only imagine the return, not just, obviously physically, but also psychologically to King's Landing after Summerhall. The party departs. It's literally a party. Everyone is celebrating. They're anticipating this new great-grandson for the king. I don't think they can advertise this, but they're anticipating dragons. It's going to be a big triumphant return when they come back. Look, we've got a new baby Daenerys. Oh, and by the way, we've also got a hatchling dragon or two. And instead, Summerhall quite literally explodes, and this, in self-explosive news, reaches the capital, and all of a sudden they're thinking, what happened? And this almost funeral cortege returns where it's Jaehaerys and Shera and their children and baby Rhaegar. Very few members of the family left. Definitely no dragons. And now it's this, physically weak, not imposing second son Jaehaerys who suddenly has to take up the mantle of government.
And as soon as he does, the Band of Nine makes their move. He may have thought they were in the background. He may have been wanting to continue focusing on the prophecy and what had gone wrong. But now he had a existential threat of sorts, someone that wanted to overthrow the dynasty. And the hero of the prior rebellion was one of the casualties of Summerhall, that being Sir Duncan the Tall. And of course, his father had been preparing for some of this, but wasn't expecting it at the time it came. So this was rather sudden, and well, they had to react quickly. But, Jaehaerys, not a warrior, as we said, but also, not a coward, right?
And certainly not a coward. And I think that I can see where, on the one hand, I think Jaehaerys is feeling a sense of terror, probably would have been feeling a sense of terror, because he's always been the least martial of Aegon V's sons. And now, this least martial of the sons has to face what is potentially the biggest Blackfyre invasion since at least the third, if not the first Blackfyre rebellion. And I think Jaehaerys may have been thinking, why is this me? Why am I the one who is leading this? Where is my brother Daeron? He should be here. Where is my father and my older brother? They should be here. Why is it on me, this least martial? I can't lead the armies myself. I can't go out on a horse, sword in hand, lance in hand, try to defeat Maelys myself. Why is this falling on me? Why is this what I'm dealing with? Why am I the last of the adult males of House Targaryen who am facing down this crisis?
Must have been a little bit nerve-wracking, if not for him, for the realm, that Aerys went on the stepstones. But they did have a good plan, and they had good leaders, even though they didn't have a lot of Targaryens around. Certainly some capable folks. And well, he would have to sit back and just wait for news and hope it went well, huh?
He would. And I think that that's, probably a frustrating aspect of Jaehaerys' reign for him, is that he can't be there on the battlefield. He can send capable commanders, he can send capable leaders, he can send his armies, but he himself is sitting in King's Landing, and he can only do so much from a writing desk. He can send the instructions, and then he has to hope that everything goes well. And I think that, I do think that Jaehaerys has a sense of what to do. Obviously, again, he's not a battlefield general. He's not going to take up sword in hand. But I do think that he has an understanding in terms of how to fight this war, how to progress in this war. Because I think he realizes, well, I need to take the fight to the Stepstones. I can't let them just land in Westeros. And number one, it's not good for my people. I can't have them just ravaging my subjects. But also number two, I can't have them rallying any kind of pro-Blackfyre or anti-Targaryen sentiment in the kingdom. I can't have them landing and saying, do you want this weakling on the Iron Throne, or do you want a powerful warrior on the Iron Throne? And hey, do you want the guy who's the son of the man who just blew up his entire family? Seems a little unstable if you ask me. At least Maelys has got an army he can lead. Jaehaerys doesn't want that. He doesn't want that kind of propaganda being put out for his people. I think he thinks, Maelys is a foreigner. Let's treat this as a foreign war. We are going to land on the Stepstones. We're going to take the fight to him. We're going to make sure he does not step one toe onto Westerosi soil.
Now, in terms of his image, and I think this is a good segue to that, we mentioned earlier that he maybe concealed something going on with his left arm. Yeah, he needed to project an image, and perhaps more so than a lot of the other Targaryen kings, because he was trying to engender a certain view or prevent people from seeing him as weak, maybe is a better way to put it. And part of that is his choice of crown, I think, right? Let's talk about that briefly.
You can't use the word briefly, because when it comes to me and talking about crowns, I could go on for about an hour, but I will try to keep this brief. Anyway, I mean, here's the thing. On a practical level, I don't think Jaehaerys has a lot of choices in terms of the crowns that are already extant in terms of what to wear. Aegon's crown was the crown of Aegon III and the crown of Viserys II. That was probably destroyed at Summerhall. I'm going to assume if it was a massive, massive, massive conflagration, that crown was probably destroyed. Jaehaerys also can't wear the crown of Aegon the Conqueror, because that was lost with Daeron I in Dorne. Although whether or not everyone has it to this day is a great theory. Anyway, but what, and I think on a personal level, Jaehaerys really isn't going to be drawn to something like the crown of Aegon the Unworthy, this sort of gaudy, over-the-top statement of Aegon IV's own ego. And so there's not a lot of choices for Jaehaerys, but I think he makes a very clever choice, and he chooses the crown of his grandfather, Maekar. It's this, band with the iron spikes on top. Actually, a little bit like the Stark crown, interestingly. It's always sort of depicted that way, which is interesting to me. But, I think it's a clever choice for Jaehaerys. Maekar is obviously Jaehaerys' next most immediate predecessor after his own father. Again, if Jaehaerys can't have his father's own crown, well, Maekar is the next in line, so he can take Maekar's crown and convey that sense of continuity. But more than that, Maekar, as we mentioned, a very famous battlefield commander and a commander against the Blackfyres. This is a king who time and again went to war against the Blackfyres and won. This was someone who was not afraid to take up the sword for House Targaryen and say, no, Blackfyres, you do not get the Iron Throne, and I will stop you at the point of my sword. And so I think Jaehaerys realizes, look, I'm personally not a warrior king. I will never be a warrior king. But I can sort of take some of the legacy of that most famous of warrior kings. I can take that on and say, I am not literally going to be on the battlefield, but I am bringing in the spirit of my grandfather. By wearing his crown, I am saying, I am stepping into Maekar's shoes. He was willing to take the fight to the Blackfyres, so am I. He would bravely face them down, so am I. He did not let them take the Iron Throne, and neither am I going to do that.
And, of course, he had to give up command to someone else, as we said, and that turned out to be Orban Baratheon, who, of course, is the grandfather of Robert, Renly, and Stannis. And this is notable for a couple of reasons, at least, and some of them are a little subtle, aren't they?
They are. And this is a point that I talk about a fair amount on various Tumblr posts, and I really do believe in this. I think this is a more important moment than it might seem on face, because for the first time in a major Westerosi war since the conquest, there are no Targaryens commanding anywhere in the field. It's not the king, it's not one of the adult princes. No Targaryens are leading the charge here. Obviously, Ormond is a descendant of a Targaryen bastard son. obviously he's married to a Targaryen, so it's not like they're completely divorced from the Targaryens, but he's not a Targaryen himself. And I think that's such an important distinction, because even after the Targaryens lost their dragons, they were still leading troops on the battlefield. Kings and princes of House Targaryen were still leading the armies. They were still claiming that title of protector of the realm, this sort of what I like to call the warden of wardens, the one who will, defend the realm and protect it. But now, the power of command on the battlefield, it's not in the hands of a Targaryen. It's in the hands of a Targaryen vassal. They're not just bringing the troops. They're leading the troops. Jaehaerys is directing the war. Again, Jaehaerys is giving commands. But when it comes to decisions on the battlefield, that's not in the hands of the Targaryens. And I think this is a crucial moment. When we talked a little bit earlier, and I sort of made the meme reference about the line of dominoes. When we're thinking about the origins of Robert's Rebellion, I think we need to look at this moment. Because I think this is a moment where, remember, this is all of the aristocrats of Westeros. This is Westeros' really only united war where everyone is coming together to fight a foreign enemy. All of these aristocrats from all over the country are gathering together, and I think they're thinking, guys, what are we doing? Wait a second. When our ancestors bent the knee to Aegon the Conqueror, what was the arrangement there? Yes, we gave up our crowns. Yes, we gave up our royal titles. Yes, we agreed to pay their taxes and fight in their wars and do them homage. But what was the agreement from them in return? They agreed to protect us, and they agreed to protect our ancestral rights. And what have we gotten in recent memory? Are they protecting us? Well, not if you're living under Aerys I, because he left them, pun fully intended, high and dry against the Ironborn. And are they protecting our ancestral rights? Well, not if you're living under Aegon V, because he's trying to take them away. He's trying to implement his own reforms. And so I think for people especially like Hoster and Brynden Tully and Rickard Stark and Jon Arryn, I think they're looking at this moment and thinking, guys, we've got the power here. We're the ones with the armies. We're the ones leading the armies. Where's the Targaryens? They're nowhere except for Aerys, who's a squire. We're the ones with the power here. We're the ones who can say something. So why are we living in the same arrangement that we had when the Targaryens had dragons? It doesn't add up. It doesn't make sense. To be clear, I am not saying that it's the War of the Nine Penny Kings that makes them want to replace the Targaryens with the Baratheons. That is not what happened. But what I'm saying is, when we're thinking about the origin of this dispute between the crown and its vassals, and that really is at the heart of Robert's Rebellion, I think we do need to start here. And I do think we need to think about this moment where maybe there's the beginning of this self-awareness that we really are the ones with the power here. We're the ones who can enforce the rule of House Targaryen or not. And if we are, then we're also the ones who can enforce changes.
And that is an interesting way to consider Jaehaerys' thoughts on the matter. He may have not just been wanting to put himself on the battlefield for optics, but he may have realized this facet as well, that without Targaryens on the battlefield, people might look around and realize they don't need Targaryens anymore. So he may have been noticing that, especially given that his head was very deep in the idea of getting dragons back and what that would mean for them. So he would have a thorough understanding, I think, of the ins and outs of what that level of power would mean with or without dragons, and extending that to with or without notable warriors. I mean, previous generation, they had some pretty big names, right? Aemon the Dragon Knight, Baelor Breakspear, King Daeron. Yeah, there's nothing like that in this era. And there hadn't been a whole lot in a while other than young Prince Daeron, who was killed by the Rat and Hawk and the Pig, and his career was cut a little short. So that affects people's ability to remember him and for him to rack up the deeds. Might be a little why the replacement commander for Ormond when he was killed was Sir Gerald Hightower. So that's interesting. He was named by Jaehaerys and then became the commander in replacement here. So that's an interesting little subtopic, isn't it?
It is. And I think that, I do think that it's a very purposeful designation that Jaehaerys gives him to name Gerald Hightower as the new commander. Because I think that Jaehaerys believes this is as close as I can personally get to being on the battlefield. I can't personally go, and my son is far too young to name him as commander. But if I name the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, that is the representative of the crown. He's not acting as a member of House Hightower. He is acting as a representative of House Targaryen. He is my sword arm, so to speak. He is the person who, when you look at him, you are looking at me. I am there on the battlefield, just not physically. And it's interesting because we really don't get a huge sense of what Gerald's backstory was, or why Jaehaerys names him, how they become aware of each other. Presumably, Gerald did know him. Presumably he was already on the Kingsguard, though we don't know exactly how long. But I think that maybe Jaehaerys is looking at him and thinking, well, first of all, he's at least relatively speaking, young man. Although I don't know exactly how young he was because Doug was around 70 when he died. So anyone who's appointed after that is probably going to be considered young by comparison. But he's a relatively young man, so he's vigorous, he's healthy, he can sort of administer this war in Jaehaerys' name. And I think that Jaehaerys may have also thought, well, he's an aristocrat, and he's an aristocrat from a very old-blooded family. So he knows what it is to command other aristocrats. He knows what it is to work among aristocratic circles and give orders. He's been trained to do that, probably since boyhood. So, it makes sense that Jaehaerys is looking at him and thinking, if I can't be there, then I want the next best thing, and that's Gerald Hightower.
Yeah, and it's an interesting evolution of Targaryen power as well. If we're thinking, well, they no longer have their own great warriors, they certainly don't have dragons, well, at least they can have the Kingsguard, and they can put the very best of the best in there. And that manifests much later. I think maybe we can trace this to this as well, this time, which is that Aerys was known for having a particularly strong Kingsguard. At least some of those were Jaehaerys' Kingsguard, because, of course, he inherited them, and Jaehaerys' reign was so short, they didn't have much time to get killed. So, in fact, it may be most of them. I know Arthur Dayne came along a little later, but certainly the culmination of the Fifth Blackfyre Rebellion, or the War of the Nine Penny Kings, was due to the next man to join the Kingsguard, and what a story that is.
I mean, it really is. And again, we mentioned this at the beginning. Jaehaerys may have been there when Barristan sort of made his debut on the chivalric scene, so to speak. And now it's Barristan who saves House Targaryen. It's Barristan who steps into the Sabaton, so to speak, of Duncan the Tall and cuts down another Blackfyre pretender. And to what extent Jaehaerys was there when young Barristan jousted against Duncan the Tall, or Duncan the Small, maybe not. But I think he would have been very justified in noting this boy and seeing, look how he's come up. This is someone who is devoted to the crown, who wants to spend his life wearing that white cloak, serving the crown, defending the crown's honor. Barristan is a legend in his own time. He is someone that is spoken about with other legendary figures of the Kingsguard, like Iron Redwyne and Aemon the Dragon Knight. And it's Jaehaerys. It's Jaehaerys who puts that white cloak on him, who singles him out and says, yes, you have earned this spot. You get to defend House Targaryen for the rest of your life.
Yeah, I like that. And, I mean, Barristan, as far as we know, he wanted to be a Kingsguard all his life. He grew up dreaming of that. So it really does fit. It really does come together nicely. And it is pretty much perfect for what Jaehaerys needs around him at this time. He seems to have done a pretty good job after the war, right? He had to start with that, so it kind of was a stunted beginning to his reign. He had to focus on a war. But once the war was settled, which wasn't super long, he got to ruling. And it went pretty well, right? Mostly pretty well, right?
Yeah, it seems to have been fairly well. Now, again, part of that is a function of time. There's not a lot of time between the end of the war and Jaehaerys' death. So, had he lived another 10, 20, 30 years, would people have been as happy with Jaehaerys as king? Maybe not. But he doesn't have to live that long. In a strange way, like his brother Daeron, he gets to die as a sort of war hero. He gets to die with the memory of this war. Sort of the last thing that people remember about him is, well, at least Jaehaerys, helped us win this war. At least Jaehaerys was king when we won this war against the Blackfyres. But no, it seems pretty stable, pretty secure. I think that the most notable part about Jaehaerys' brief reign after the war is that he makes sure that he reconciles these houses who had been unhappy with the Iron Throne because of his father's attempted reforms. Now, we don't know what those reforms were, number one, and so we don't know what Jaehaerys might have done to reconcile those houses. But I think this speaks to the point that I was just making a little bit ago, which is that I think Jaehaerys realized correctly, this is not the time for me to antagonize my vassals. This is not the time that I can say, right, and now let's go right back to what my dad was doing, and you give up all of your ancestral powers so that I can look after the small folk. This is not the climate that he wants to do that in, because his vassals have just shown they've got power. They've got armies that can defeat a foreign enemy. The armies that can defeat a foreign enemy can also defeat the armies of the Crown Lands and replace you if they very much want to. And I think Jaehaerys realizes, I don't have the strength, personally, draconically, militarily, to fight off my vassals. So let's just not antagonize them. Let's just keep things at a status quo, and everyone will be happy with it, and we won't, we'll try to make sure everyone's okay with the Targaryen sitting the Iron Throne, since they've just been presented with the opportunity to crown an alternative.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. Their gratitude over stopping Meleys would only go so far. They would still want what they want. They're, by nature, drawn to power and don't want to lose what they had, as you say. So, yeah, reforms don't work when you're not very strong. That's very true. By the way, speaking of their alternative, if Meleys was crowned, would there have to be like 2 crowns, like one little crown?
Weigh in the comments. Would there be 2 crowns for Meleys the Monstrous?
Death. Jaehaerys died in 262. He was only 37. His reign was only about 3 years. Aegon III also died at 37. We mentioned that earlier as an example, but he had been king for almost 30 years. So it goes to show how just because they were the same age, that's not a really great comparison otherwise, because of so many differences in their life besides that. He apparently just had a shortness of breath, and then that was it. He had a short illness and then passed. Normally, we have a good reason to at least consider suspicion here, but it doesn't really fit here very well. There's nothing big happened after his death. No one seems to have had a lot of motive. I don't know. It seems like maybe this one's just mundane.
I agree. I don't think there's really any suspicion here. And I think the fact that, usually when the author wants us to be suspicious or think about something, he'll usually layer in a clue. He'll tip us off. He'll say, hey, something's not quite right about this. There's really not anything there. I mean, we know that Jaehaerys is frail and sickly throughout his entire life. And we know he's just gone through the biggest war, certainly in the last 2 to 3 decades, if not longer, that Westeros has experienced. I mean, you look at any given president or head of state, when they come into office and then after they come into office, and look at just the physical change to that individual. I think that was probably true of Jaehaerys as well. For someone who already wasn't physically robust, and then to go through the stress of managing a war, a very big and important war against the last of the Blackfyre pretenders, I think that took a toll on him. I think that he just really got broken down by the stress of that. I think the comparison here is maybe someone like George VI. So George VI is also a second son. He comes to the throne after his brother abdicates to marry a commoner. And he also gets pretty quickly, not so immediately, but pretty quickly thrown into the Second World War. And so he is King of Great Britain when the Second World War is happening, when the Blitz is happening in London, and he's managing this. And he doesn't die quite so quickly after it as Jaehaerys does, but it does take a toll on him, physically, psychologically. And so I think that's maybe the thought that George is going for here is Jaehaerys is not robust to begin with. He goes through a really stressful period. It kind of just is too much for him. He's not going to live a long life after that.
It's almost a little bit like the concept that Bloodraven and the children tell Bran, which is that a lot of the most powerful wielders of the old gods' magic, for lack of a better term, are not around very long. Like Jojen was open to his powers after illness, and Bran after his fall, things like that. So this isn't like that because he isn't literally endowed with those same powers, but it is thematically very similar. A man very interested in power, very interested in supernatural power, but also burdened by it, as you say, because that would be part of it. Not only the political, not only the dynastic, but the expectation of the world savior coming from his line. As far as people who had shorter reigns, we said that he didn't quite have the shortest one. Aegon II and Viserys II. That's it, right? I guess being the second isn't so great in Westeros. Although Daeron II did a pretty good job. He lasted for a while.
Aerys II not
lasted
so
for a while too,
much.
but that's not a good one, yeah. Legacy. The memory of King Jaehaerys has had quite the impact on Sir Barristan since he got his white cloak from Barristan, and it's something he's cherished his whole life. So that's got to be an important moment, something very memorable to him, and, well, Barristan cites Jaehaerys when defending his career as a Kingsguard to Joffrey after the death of Robert. Quote,
Sansa watched as the knight peered up at his new king. She had never seen him look his years before, yet now he did.
Your Grace,
he said.
I was chosen for the White Swords in my 23rd year. It was all I had ever dreamed from the moment I first took sword in hand. I gave up all claim to my ancestral keep. The girl I was to wed married my cousin in my place. I had no need of land or sons. My life would be lived for the realm. Sir Gerald Hightower himself heard my vows. To ward the king with all my strength. To give my blood for his. I fought beside the White Bull and Prince Lewin of Dorne, beside Sir Arthur Dane, the Sword of the Morning. Before I served your father, I helped shield King Aerys and his father Jaehaerys before him. 3 kings. Yeah, Dany's really moved by this. She never even considered that Barristan could have known her grandparents. It wasn't something that crossed her mind. As we alluded to earlier, she may never actually get the chance to hear these stories, and that's kind of a bummer, but hopefully she does. And if she does learn about those things, well, that's really interesting. Like, she may learn some things about him that affect her decisions, which will, in a way, justify or at least extend his legacy in a way that he maybe didn't predict, but would have maybe been happy to see.
No, I mean, it's interesting. And I think that, it's very obvious from that quote where, Barristan is kind of talking about his career and his life as a Kingsguard. He's still thinking about Jaehaerys. He's still thinking about, this is the person who gave me this cloak. That he doesn't think of himself, Barristan, as someone who sort of emerged into the White Cloaks fully formed. He thinks about, this is something that was given to me, and it was given to me by Jaehaerys II. This is someone that I will always have a personal connection with, because without him, I would not be Barristan the Bold, legendary commander of the Kingsguard.
And as the only person that witnessed Jaehaerys, this next take of his, which is in the context of Hizdar's reaction to Grolio's head being revealed, which of course is a big provocation. Grolio was a hostage that was supposed to be not killed. That's not what you're supposed to do with hostages when you want to maintain the peace. So Barristan had a very interesting reaction to this, and here it is, quote,
Sir Barristan glanced toward the throne. He had served so many kings, he could not help but imagine how they might have reacted to this provocation. Aerys would have flinched away in horror, likely cutting himself on the barbs of the Iron Throne, then shrieked at his swordsmen to cut the Yonkishmen to pieces. Robert would have shouted for his hammer to repay Bloodbeard in kind. Even Jaehaerys, reckoned weak by many, would have ordered the arrest of Bloodbeard and the Yonkish slavers.
So he acknowledges that Jaehaerys may have been considered weak by others given his physical sickliness, but he absolutely doesn't agree with that view. It's pretty clear, even though he doesn't come out and say it, that he doesn't see it that way. He had some admiration for Jaehaerys. In fact, that may stem in part because he had some physical setbacks. He may have looked on that as something that he overcame and respects him for it.
I agree with that. I mean, I think that Barristan is clearly turned off by how Hizdar reacts, which is why he's thinking about this. This is, to your point, this is a shocking move to not just kill a hostage, but then to throw the head on the ground. I mean, that is just it is a deliberate provocation. They are looking for war here. And so I think as Barristan is thinking about this, he's thinking, well, any king worth his salt would have to respond to that. And yeah, you could be a king like a Robert, who is very much a warrior king. He wants to go to war about this right that very moment. And you could be a violent king like Aerys and say, well, someone else has to cut him down. But I think Barristan realizes even someone like a Jaehaerys, no, he's not going to pick up his own sword or call for his own sword. He's not, either warlike like that or violent like that. But he's going to recognize this is not right. This is not what you do with hostages. This is something that has to be responded to. And I think that it's interesting that Barristan says, well, Jaehaerys would have ordered the arrest of Bloodbeard and Younkish slavers. Is Barristan thinking of Jaehaerys as following in his own father's footsteps? Because what does Egg do when Bloodraven has Aenys Blackfyre murdered? He arrests him. That's the first thing that he does. I think that if Barristan may not be literally thinking about that moment, but in thinking about Jaehaerys in this way, he may unconsciously be comparing Jaehaerys to his own father as someone who, when he sees an injustice done, he's going to prosecute that. He's going to make sure that the wrongdoers are promptly and properly arrested and brought to justice.
I agree. One final, very minor character that might have a connection here is Squire Dalbridge. Now, if you don't recall who that is, it's one of Corrin's band, Corrin Halfhands. He was the elite archer that guarded the pass that helped them make their attempted escape. And he was supposedly the squire for a king. Now, Aerys wasn't likely to be possible because of the age, and that also eliminates Robert from contention, because Squire Dalbridge is not a young man. So Jaehaerys is probably our best bet. We know that Jaehaerys was on the battlefield at least once, and he would have worn armor at other times, perhaps for stately events or other occasions. So he would have needed help dressing up. That's the thing. Even if he wasn't on the battlefield very often, he still would have had a squire. So it's a pretty interesting connection and a possible fit. Not a whole lot to say about it, but a fun little piece of world building that adds some connections between places you wouldn't expect it.
Agreed. And I think, well, and I'll note, although it's obviously semi-canonical, the World of Ice and Fire app does explicitly identify Jaehaerys as the king that Dalbridge squired for. Again, semi-canonical, but take that for what it's worth. I do agree, though, that just makes sense for every other reason that you lay out. And I think that, it doesn't have to be the case in Westeros, although it's typical, if not, almost always, that a squire is going to squire for an anointed knight. Doesn't have to be the case. We've got Oliver Frey, who squires for Robb. Robb is not an anointed knight, but he's a king, he's a warrior, and so it's no shame for Oliver to squire for him. Similar story, well, perhaps not so similar, but similar in the sense that not a knight, with Podrick Payne and Tyrion. Tyrion is obviously not an anointed knight. He's never going to be an anointed knight, probably. But Podrick is still squiring for him because, well, he's sort of a tangential Lannister retainer, and Tyrion is a high-ranking Lannister. So I think even if Jaehaerys was never formally knighted, even if he was never trained formally in knighthood or fully in knighthood, it still may have been very possible that he had squires simply because he was a prince and a king, and that's what a prince and a king does. He has squires. He has squires that he, at least nominally, trains in the arts of war. And I like the idea that, especially if Jaehaerys was not knighted, and so couldn't knight Dalbridge himself, maybe Dalbridge took the black either after Jaehaerys' death or after Robert's rebellion, because he says, I don't want the honor. Like, I squired for a king, so no one else can do the honor for me. Like, no one else could be as high as Jaehaerys to knight me. I won't accept that for anyone else. I don't want to accept loyalty to anyone else because that would be degrading in my eyes, stepping down because I squired for a king. Like, that was the height of what I could do. So anything else is lesser. I'm either going to devote myself to the Targaryens and then go to the wall after, as so many Targaryen loyalists were, or I might just go to the wall directly and say, my life ends with Jaehaerys. If he's dead, then I'm just going to resign myself to the wall.
And if he perceived Jaehaerys as someone that was really giving himself to the realm, someone that was genuine carer for the realm, he had compassion for his subjects or really wanted to do right by them, then his squire might have that same attitude and would see service to the Night's Watch as a very good way to continue that work in a humble way befitting a squire. Yeah, I like that a lot. It's a very good small story. Has a beginning and a tragic end, but a heroic end of his own. So, yeah, he had his long career, and hopefully they're united in death. Squire Dalbridge and Jaehaerys II having a beer and an ale in the afterlife there in the somewhere there with the seven overlooking.
If only Stone Snake had squired for Jaehaerys, then we could have some more information on him. He's still out there, out there somewhere.
Yeah. Hopefully he got all the information from Squire Dalbridge. They did an info dump, right? Like many key figures from the decades just before Song of Ice and Fire, there's a decent chance, if not a strong chance, we learn more about Jaehaerys II as the story unfolds because, well, Barristan could think about him again, or the prophecy could be spelled out to us in ways that validate his beliefs or expand on them. The Ghost of Highheart could have some more say in it, or we could hear more about her. Rhaegar information, Summerhall, the Blackfyres, Queen Shera. There's a lot of characters that have connection to him and a lot of plot lines that have connection to him. And yeah, that gives us a sense that there's more to tell someday. Let us know what you thought of this episode and this character. It's a very wide open subject, and we would love to hear from you about it. The size of the list of connected episodes is further more tangible evidence of how important Jaehaerys II is. I mean, we did 2 episodes on the War of Ninepenny Kings, like 8 episodes on the Blackfyre rebellions, an episode on the Ghost of Highheart, 2 episodes of Summerhall. So these are really important topics, not just a nice variety of them that he was hooked into. So I think that's noteworthy as well. Well, thanks, Nina. This is a lot of fun. We had a great time talking about this episode. You wrote a lot of great things for us to discuss, and I was able to add a few things myself, of course, and I hope folks are happy with it. So
I do too.
Well, people can find you at goodqueenally.tumblr.com as usual, with that one L in Alley. If you want to hear other episodes that we did with Nina, if you haven't heard them already, we have the Ryam Red Wine one most recently, and a trio of Baelor the Blessed episodes that we had a great time doing.
I had way too much to say about Baelor the Blessed, so you can go and listen.
Well, he reigned for about 3 times longer than Jaehaerys, so
that's
it's
true.
about right.
You get as many episodes as you had a reign for, so
yeah, it's roughly like an hour per year or something like that.
We'll do a 10-part series on Jaehaerys the First someday. It'll be fine.
Oh God. Thanks to Joey Townsend for our theme music, and to Michael Klarfeld for our intro video, and for the maps you see behind me in pretty much every episode. Check him out at claridox.de. And now our Patreon credits for those loyal supporters of History of Westeros podcast. Our Hand of the King is a baseborn manjack, literally just a drunken spearman. Gods help us. Lord Jim the Fortuitous of Wars and Politics of Ice and Fire blog and Warden of the West. Cabeth the Unfrozen, Lord of the Bricks and Castle Crimson Light, Defender of the Old Gods and Warden of the North. Andrew of House Crane, Lord of Red Lake, Keeper of the Bloodied Waters and Warden of the South. Wings of Gold, Wings of Silver. Our Warden of the East is... Nobody! Help! The elite from outside the realm include Pirate Queen Carrie, a storm of secrets of the sea. Captain Queen of Depth Feeder, which has sent countless ships to the bottom of the sea. Jenny the Just, captain of the ghost ship Liberty, which vanished in the Shivering Sea over a century ago, but has recently been sighted near Volantis, if the tales can be believed. Our White Walker patron is Nevada Pike, Fourth of Frost, Frost Kraken, Drowned in Ice, commander of cats and krakens. Our small council includes Lord Chris B. of House Baelish, always keep your foes confused, Master of Whisperers. Drowned Dan, Lord of House Windsor, Master of Karate, Friendship for Everyone, and Ships. Lord Goodkill McGee, ruler of Castle Over Yonder and Master of Laws. And Grand Maester Scotty. Our lords and ladies include Lady Direliz of Castle Naki, the Alpha Patron. Gregor the Toasty, Lord of the Bread Fort. The Bastard of the Wolfswood, First Forester of the Old Gods. Sworn to House Ironwerewood. Listen for the silence. Lady Mara of House Stark, Archmistress of Apothecaries and Woods Witch. Her castle features werewood doors with painted moons. Lena Snow, the Twilight Star, bastard daughter of Dane, wife of the Trickster, and Lady of Castle Rivia. Aminda Pinkwolf, lady and ruler of Castle Whitefast, the Ice Emboldens. Lord Benjen of House Hornwood. Lady Rebecca Stark of Castle Aurora, wielder of a weirwood bow and Valyrian steel-tipped arrows, and friend of Short Round the Direwolf. Aurelian Matthias Resius, Lord of House Aurelian, ruler of Domus Aurelianus and the Valley of Tanasi, wielder of Sol Invictus, possibly Valyrian steel, keeper of the largest collection of books outside the Citadel. We restore the world. Lord Darien the Daring, wielder of the Valyrian steel sword Wisdom, Lord of House Hollingsworth and the Hollyhold in Dorne, power in knowledge. Gabe the Jade Blade, whose foes are skewered and grilled. Lady Maria of House High Tree, Lady of the Castle Fair Oak on the Crooked Lake. Sigil is a long grapevine with dark green leaves and purple grapes winding around a gray stone pillar on a white field bordered by gold. Ever watchful. Lord Abelard of House Harkonnen. Michael, Master of the Grand Library, Patriarch of House Fine, Keeper of Histories. Lord Samwise Kimchi of House Chronic, higher than honor.
The Queen's High Council has Grand Archmaester Rennie, whose rod and ring and mask are quartz crystal, wielder of the Valyrian steel pen, fire and ink. Lady Wolfbird, mistress of the eastern rivers, gatekeeper of the northern skies, daughter of the Silver Sea, and our master of coin. Devora Lynn Blackwood, maker of the Frozen Fury muscle bomb, eucalyptus and mint leaves, washed with Dornish peppers, and sealed by fire ants, our master of laws. Lady Jane of Driftmark, guardian of Dragonstone, the circling flame burns, master of ships. And Lady Sonia of Sunspear, keeper of the Martell Menagerie, master of Castle Tormira Topanga, tame and keep well, master of whisperers.
Our Kingsguard includes Sir Dean the White, Knight of the Black Star, Sir Bateman the Dark Knight, Lady Ani, Bringer of Winter's Warning, Watcher in the Weirwood, Bearer of Wrist Wolves, Lord Jonathan of House Tanner, Lord Raydetto of House Avocado, Protector of the Royal Kitchens, Green in the morning, dark by evening, Lady Katie, Cat Herder of the Tobin Terrace, and Royal Feline Advisor.
Our Queensguard is led by Lord Captain Commander Haema Helminth, the Sellsword Sentinel, James the Green, Lord of the Meadows, Keeper of the Trial of Grasses, Archmaester Vena, whose ring, rod, and mask are made of steel, not pudding, and Laura Boros, the Lady of Infinity.
Our Beard Guard features Lord Commander George the Golden, Lady Rita of the Coppermane the Unbound, Dance the Fervor, Bloody Ben Blackwood, and Big Brian Blackwood, and Davin Mack, Knight of the Reeds, the Bog Knight. Our Northern champions include Jay Wilson, Winter's King, Lady Ardross, Mother of Wolves, wielder of the Valyrian steel claymore Manticore, Lady Bobby of House Mitchell, Adelard the Wanderer, wielder of the Valyrian steel axe Frostfall, Aaron Snow, the evergreen bastard who made a vow to defend the North with his weirwood-handled axe Timberfell, Sir Peter, Knight of the Gallowswood, Lyanna Snow, the Raven in Winter, Tony of House Wallowitza, a family of war scouts. We scout the way. The Bittersteel, Gandalf the White, Lord of House Seamorn, Jake Snow, aka Jacob Ice Eyes, the bastard of the Last River, and Winter's King, Lord of the First Men. And last but not least, the History of Westeros Night's Watch, led by Lord Commander Richard the Ligerheart, wielder of Barry's Ankle Breaker, a flail with blue and silver Valyrian steel spikes. Motto, Go Blue. Sir Kobe of House Stonesmith returns. Words are wind, deeds are stone. He's the legitimate grandson of the bastard of Runestone. First Steward Sir Zack of House Wild, Lord Shredder of the Spiral, wielder of the Valyrian steel axe Grail. That's it for us, everybody. Until next time, Valar Reread us.